She was just a servant in the royal stables, and he was the king about to marry a princess from a rival kingdom. But one silent glance changed everything. What followed wasn't just a love story. It was the beginning of a war, a betrayal inside the castle, and a fight for love that would change the fate of a nation. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this reading. In the grand kingdom of Dornoval, where stone towers pierced the misty skies and ancient banners fluttered in the cool breeze, a moment of historic importance was about to unfold. The great hall of the royal castle had been adorned with elaborate tapestries depicting battles won and alliances forged. Today was meant to be a day of diplomatic triumph, the day King Alaric would formally announce his betrothal to Princess Eleonora of Edavane, sealing a peace treaty between two kingdoms that had teetered on the edge of war for generations. Isabella Morgan stood in the shadows of a tall marble column, her calloused hands nervously smoothing the simple fabric of her dress. At 38, she had spent nearly 2 decades as a horse mistress in the royal stables, caring for the magnificent steeds that carried knights into battle and kings on ceremonial processions. Her position granted her access to parts of the castle most servants never saw, including this grand ceremony where nobility from across the realm had gathered. She shouldn't have been there. Someone of her station had no business witnessing such political affairs. Yet something had drawn her. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps something deeper she dared not name, even to herself. King Alaric entered the hall with measured steps, his 40 years carried with dignity beneath the weight of his crown. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a close-trimmed beard that showed the first traces of silver, he commanded respect without demanding it. Isabella had always admired him from afar, his kindness toward the horses, his respectful treatment of those who served him. Unlike many nobles, he seemed to see the humanity in everyone, regardless of their birth. "My loyal subjects and honored guests," Alaric's voice resonated through the hall as he stood before the ornate throne. "We gather today to celebrate what promises to be a new era of peace between Dornoval and Edavane." The assembled crowd nodded approvingly. Isabella watched as Princess Eleonora was escorted forward, her elaborate gown glittering with jewels, her golden hair perfectly arranged beneath a delicate tiara. She was everything Isabella was not. High-born, refined, and groomed since birth to be a queen. And then it happened, the moment that would change everything. As the princess approached, Alaric's gaze drifted across the crowd, and for the briefest moment, locked with Isabella's. Something passed between them, recognition, understanding, an unspoken connection that defied explanation. Isabella felt her breath catch in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs so loudly she feared those nearby might hear it. The king blinked, looked away, and then back to the princess. The room fell silent, anticipating his next words, the formal acceptance of the betrothal that would seal the treaty. Alaric began, his voice suddenly less certain. "I cannot proceed with this arrangement." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The princess's smile froze on her face. The ambassador from Edavane lurched to his feet, his face flushing crimson. "Your Majesty?" The royal advisor, Lord Harwick, stepped forward, confusion evident in his strained whisper. "Perhaps you misspoke?" "I did not misspeak," Alaric replied, his voice growing stronger. "I cannot and will not bind our kingdoms through a marriage built on political convenience rather than truth." Isabella pressed herself further into the shadows, her mind reeling. What was happening? This was madness. Rejecting such an alliance could mean war. "My Lord King," the Edavane ambassador sputtered, "this is an outrage, an insult to Princess Eleonora and to King Rowan himself." Alaric raised his hand. "I intend no insult. The princess is worthy of a husband who can give her his whole heart. I cannot be that man." The princess's face had gone pale, her eyes wide with humiliation. Guards shifted nervously, hands moving to sword hilts as tension filled the air. "A treaty built on falsehood will not bring lasting peace," Alaric continued, addressing the stunned assembly. "I would rather face honest conflict than dishonest alliance." Chaos erupted in the hall. Nobles shouted questions, Advisors surrounded the king, and the Edivane delegation stormed out, promising retribution for this public disgrace. Through it all, Isabella remained frozen, unable to move, unable to comprehend why the king had made such a self-destructive decision. As guards rushed to escort the king from the increasingly hostile environment, Alaric's eyes found Isabella's once more. This time, there was something more in his gaze, a question, perhaps, or a promise. Then he was gone, swept away by his protectors, leaving her trembling in the shadows. "Did you see that?" whispered a servant nearby. "The king has lost his mind. They say he's been distracted for weeks now, disappearing for hours with no explanation." Isabella pushed away from the column. She needed air. She needed to escape the suffocating tension of the hall and the inexplicable feeling that somehow, in some way she couldn't understand, the king's decision was connected to her. She slipped through servant passages until she reached the courtyard, gulping the cool air. The stables beckoned, her domain, her sanctuary. There among the horses she understood far better than people. She might make sense of what had just transpired. But as she crossed the yard, a royal guard intercepted her. "Mistress Morgan," he said, his expression unreadable. "The king requests your presence. Immediately." Isabella's heart stopped, then raced. There must be some mistake. Why would His Majesty? "No mistake," the guard replied. "You are to come now, through the private entrance." As she followed the guard toward a small door she had passed 1,000 times, but never entered, Isabella felt the ground beneath her feet shift like sand. Everything she knew, her place, her purpose, her carefully ordered life, suddenly seemed as insubstantial as morning mist. What could the king possibly want with her? And why today, of all days, when he had just thrown the kingdom into turmoil? The door opened, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling upward into the unknown. With each step she took, Isabella felt herself climbing not just toward the king's chambers, but toward a destiny she had never imagined possible. One that would soon set the wheels of war in motion and transform a simple horse mistress into the most unexpected queen Dorneval had ever known. The winding staircase seemed endless as Isabella followed the stoic guard upward. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. The distant sounds of chaos from the great hall faded, replaced by the hollow echo of their footsteps against stone. "In here," the guard instructed, gesturing toward a heavy oak door. "His Majesty awaits." Isabella hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for the iron handle. This wasn't the throne room or the royal audience chamber, but something more intimate, the king's private study. She had never ventured anywhere near the royal apartments before. The door opened to reveal a surprisingly modest room lined with bookshelves and maps. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. King Alaric stood by the window, still wearing his ceremonial attire, though he had removed his crown. It rested on a cushion nearby, looking strangely vulnerable without its wearer. "Leave us," he commanded the guard without turning. When the door closed with a heavy thud, he finally faced her. "Mistress Morgan." "Your Majesty." Isabella dropped into a deep curtsy, keeping her eyes fixed on the ornate carpet beneath her feet. "You summoned me. Please, stand." His voice sounded different here, less regal, more human. "And look at me, Isabella." The use of her given name startled her. She rose slowly, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes, the weight of responsibility in the set of his shoulders. "Do you know why I've called for you?" he asked. "No, Your Majesty. I cannot imagine why you would require the services of a stable mistress at such a moment." A faint smile touched his lips. "I think perhaps you can imagine." Heat rose to her cheeks. "I don't understand." Alaric turned back to the window. Below, courtiers and diplomats were hurrying across the courtyard, their faces tight with concern. "What did you think of the ceremony today?" "It is not my place to have opinions on royal matters, sire." "And yet I am asking for yours." His tone was gentle but insistent. Isabella swallowed hard. I thought you seemed unhappy before you spoke." He nodded slowly. "Perceptive. Most saw only a king about to secure a peace treaty. You saw a man trapped by obligation." He turned to face her again. Why is that, I wonder? Perhaps because I work with horses, Your Majesty. They cannot hide their true feelings behind courtly manners. One learns to recognize authentic emotion. This drew a genuine laugh from him, a warm, rich sound rarely heard within the castle walls. Well said. Please sit. He gestured to a chair near the fire, then took the one opposite. Isabella perched awkwardly on the edge of the seat, hyper-aware of the impropriety of sitting in the king's presence. Your Majesty, may I speak frankly? Please do. I've had enough diplomatic language for one day. The kingdom is in turmoil over your decision. There will be consequences. Yes. His expression darkened. War, most likely. Edivane has been looking for an excuse. Then why? Why reject the alliance? The question burst from her before she could contain it. Alaric studied her for a long moment, firelight reflecting in his eyes. Because some prices are too high, even for peace. Because a king who lives a lie serves his people poorly. He leaned forward. Because I have watched you for months now, Isabella Morgan, and I cannot pretend my heart remains my own to give away in political bargaining. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and undeniable. Isabella felt the room spin around her. Your Majesty, she whispered, you cannot mean... I do. His voice was quiet but resolute. I have observed you. Your kindness to the animals in your care, your patience with the stable boys, your dignity despite how some of the nobles treat those they consider beneath them. I've seen you reading poetry by candlelight when you think no one is watching. You've been watching me? The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. At first it was chance. I often walk the grounds at night when sleep eludes me. Then I found myself seeking you out. He ran a hand through his hair, a disarmingly human gesture for a king. I know how this must sound. A king infatuated with a woman he has barely spoken to. It sounds like madness, she said honestly. Perhaps it is. He smiled sadly. But today, standing there, about to pledge myself to a woman I do not love, while the woman who has captured my thoughts stood in the shadows, I could not do it. Isabella rose abruptly, moving to the fireplace to hide her conflicted expression. Your Majesty, you've thrown away a peace treaty, risked war because of feelings for a stable mistress you barely know? The court will call it more than madness. They'll call it folly. Do you think I don't know that? There was frustration in his voice now. Do you think I made this decision lightly? I've fought it for months. She turned to face him. And what do you expect now? What do you want from me? Alaric stood, approaching slowly as one might a skittish colt. I want to know if there is any chance you might feel something in return. I want to know if I've risked everything for a possibility, or merely for a fantasy. His proximity sent her heart racing. Up close, he was just a man, a powerful one, yes, but flesh and blood like any other. She could smell the subtle scent of cedar and leather that clung to his clothes. Even if I did, she said carefully, what future could there possibly be? I am not of noble birth. I have no title, no dowry, no political value. You have something far more rare, he said softly. Authenticity, strength without cruelty, kindness without weakness. The court would never accept me. The people would revolt. Let me worry about the court. His hand reached for hers, hesitated, then completed the gesture. His touch was warm, surprisingly calloused for a king. I ask only one thing. Time. Time to know you beyond my observations. Time for you to know me as a man, not just as your sovereign. Isabella looked down at their joined hands, his adorned with the royal signet, hers marked by years of honest labor. The contrast was stark, undeniable. This is dangerous, she whispered. For both of us. Yes. He didn't deny it. But I believe it's worth the risk. Do you? The question hung between them. Isabella thought of her life before this moment. Predictable, safe, unremarkable. She thought of the chaos that would follow any association with the king. She thought of the way her heart had responded to his gaze across the great hall. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but I would like to find out." Something changed in his expression, hope kindling where resignation had been. "Then meet me tomorrow, at dusk, in the royal gardens near the old oak. No guards, no crowns, just two people talking." She knew she should refuse. Every instinct for self-preservation urged caution, yet she heard herself say, "I will come." The smile that transformed his face made him look younger, unburdened. "Until tomorrow, then." As Isabella left the king's chambers, descending the spiral staircase on unsteady legs, she felt as though she had stepped off a precipice. The castle was still in an uproar. Servants whispered in corners, nobles argued in hallways, messengers rushed in and out with urgent dispatches. No one paid any attention to the stable mistress making her way back to familiar territory. That night, she couldn't sleep. The king's words replayed in her mind as she tossed and turned on her simple cot in the room adjacent to the stables. Outside her window, she could hear the occasional whinny of horses and the measured tread of guards on patrol. The normal sounds of castle life continued while everything had changed. Dawn broke with a pale, uncertain light. Isabella rose and went about her duties mechanically, feeding the horses, checking hooves, instructing the stable boys. But her mind was elsewhere, counting the hours until dusk. News spread through the castle like wildfire. Edivane's delegation had departed in fury, diplomatic relations were severed, and the border garrisons were being reinforced. War preparations had begun in earnest. Servants whispered about the king's strange behavior, his distraction during council meetings, his unusual solitary walks around the castle grounds. "He's lost his mind," a kitchen maid confided as she delivered oats for the horses. "They say he refused the princess without explanation. Lord Harwick is beside himself." Isabella said nothing, focusing on measuring feed portions with exaggerated care. The weight of secret knowledge pressed upon her. Had the king truly risked everything? For her? It seemed impossible, yet his words had carried the unmistakable ring of truth. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Isabella changed into her cleanest dress, still simple, still marked by her work, but the best she had. She unbraided and rebraided her dark hair, pinching her cheeks for color. Then, heart-pounding, she made her way toward the royal gardens. The king was already there, standing beneath the ancient oak as promised. He wore simpler clothes than she had ever seen him in, a plain tunic and breeches that might belong to any prosperous merchant or minor noble. Without his crown and royal regalia, he looked different, more approachable, yet no less commanding. He smiled when he saw her, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You came." "I said I would." She stopped a respectful distance away, suddenly unsure how to behave in this strange new territory between them. "Walk with me?" He offered his arm as if she were a lady of the court. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand lightly upon it. Together they strolled along the garden paths as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Two figures moving through a moment stolen from reality. A king and a stable mistress, stepping into a future neither could possibly predict. The royal gardens of Dorneval had been designed centuries ago to create the illusion of wilderness tamed, nature bent to human will while retaining its essential beauty. As twilight deepened around them, Isabella and Alaric walked in companionable silence beneath arbors heavy with night-blooming jasmine. Their sweet scent perfumed the air, intoxicating and dreamlike. "I used to hide here as a boy," Alaric said, breaking the silence, "when the burden of being a prince became too heavy." Isabella glanced at him, surprised by this glimpse into his past. "I wouldn't have thought a prince would need to hide. Perhaps hide is the wrong word. Escape might be better." He guided her toward a stone bench partially concealed by a flowering hedge. Every moment of a royal child's life is scheduled, observed, judged. Here, I could simply be. They sat, maintaining a proper distance between them despite the intimacy of their conversation. A nightingale began to sing somewhere nearby, its melody pure and sweet in the gathering darkness. "And now? Where does a king escape to?" Isabella asked. A smile touched his lips. The stables sometimes, late at night. To watch me, she said softly, not a question. At first it was just to be among the horses. They asked nothing of me except kindness. His eyes met hers. Then I noticed how you spoke to them, not as beasts, but as companions worthy of respect. It was refreshing. Isabella felt heat rise to her cheeks, grateful for the dim light that hid her blush. They understand more than people think. Intentions, emotions, horses sense them all. Like you sensed my unhappiness at the ceremony. He studied her face. Tell me something of yourself, Isabella. Something no one else in the castle knows. She hesitated, weighing her words carefully. I taught myself to read. My father was a blacksmith who believed education was wasted on girls. When I was young, I would trade small tasks for reading lessons from a village priest. And now you read poetry by candlelight. His voice held admiration rather than mockery. When I can find it. Books are precious things, not easily come by for someone of my station. Alaric leaned forward slightly. What else do you love besides horses and poetry? The directness of his interest was disarming. Isabella had spent years being invisible to the nobility, a mere function rather than a person. To be seen, truly seen, by the king himself was both exhilarating and terrifying. Dawn, she answered after a moment's thought. That moment when night surrenders to day, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of rain on the stable roof. She smiled. Simple things, Your Majesty. Alaric, he corrected gently. Here, in this garden. Could I be just Alaric to you? The request hung between them, weighted with significance. To address the king by his given name was a privilege granted to few. I'm not certain I can, she admitted. It feels presumptuous. Then try. Just once. His eyes held a challenge. Isabella took a breath, the name foreign on her tongue. Alaric. He smiled, genuine pleasure lighting his features. There, the world didn't end. A comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated only by the nightingale's song and the distant sounds of the castle preparing for night. In this hidden corner of the garden, the politics and perils of the wider world seemed far away. May I ask you something? Isabella ventured after a while. Anything. Yesterday you said you'd been watching me for months. Why did you never speak to me before now? Alaric's expression grew contemplative. Fear, perhaps. Not of rejection, though that too, but of change. As long as I observed from a distance, I could maintain the illusion that my feelings were manageable. He sighed. Then came the treaty negotiations, and suddenly time ran out. So you chose, what? To throw away peace for a chance at happiness, he finished simply. Though I know how selfish that must sound. Isabella shook her head. It sounds human. From somewhere in the castle, a bell tolled the hour. The sound seemed to break the spell that had enveloped them. Reality intruded once more. He was king, she was servant, and the world would not long permit them to forget it. I should return to the stables, Isabella said reluctantly. The night groom will wonder where I've gone. Alaric nodded, though disappointment shadowed his face. When can I see you again? The question carried weight beyond the simple words. Each meeting increased the risk of discovery, of scandal, of consequences neither could fully predict. Tomorrow, she suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. The same time? His smile returned. I'll be counting the hours. As they rose to part ways, his hand brushed hers, a touch so brief it might have been accidental. Yet Isabella felt it like a brand upon her skin. They exchanged no further words, only a glance laden with unspoken possibilities, before each returned to their separate worlds. Unknown to either of them, a figure withdrew deeper into the shadows of a nearby hedge. Morven Fletcher, under-steward to the royal household, had been cutting through the gardens on an errand when the sound of voices had drawn his attention. What he'd witnessed sent dark thoughts racing through his mind. A commoner alone with the king in the gardens at dusk. And not just any commoner, but the stable mistress who had caught the eye of more than one nobleman over the years. Morven had always resented Isabella for her quiet dignity, her refusal to be cowed by her station, the respect she commanded despite her common birth. That resentment crystallized now into something more dangerous. Could she be the reason for the king's inexplicable rejection of the treaty? The timing was suspicious. If so, it was information that might prove valuable to the right people. Morven had always believed himself destined for greater things than serving others. Perhaps this was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. As Isabella returned to her quarters adjacent to the stables, she found her assistant, a freckle-faced young woman named Bess, waiting anxiously.
"Where have you been?"
Bess asked, her voice tight with worry.
"There's talk everywhere. They say Edivane has called up its border garrisons. War is coming, and all because the king refused the princess."
Isabella busied herself checking on a pregnant mare, avoiding Bess's searching gaze. "The affairs of kings are not our concern. But they are. If there's war, the stable will be emptied of horses for the knights. And you know what they're saying?" Bess leaned closer, dropping her voice. "They're saying the king has gone mad, that he's been bewitched." Isabella's hand stilled on the mare's flank. "That's dangerous talk. It's everywhere. Lord Harwick was heard saying the king hasn't been himself for months. Distracted, absent from council meetings, wandering the grounds alone at night." Bess's eyes widened. "Do you think it's true? Could someone have enchanted him?" "Don't be ridiculous," Isabella snapped more harshly than she intended. "The king is not bewitched. He's making decisions he believes are right for the kingdom." Bess looked unconvinced. "By insulting Edivane? By inviting war?" She shook her head. "Something isn't right, Isabella. Everyone feels it." Later that night, as Isabella lay on her narrow bed, sleep eluded her. Bess's words echoed in her mind, mingling with memories of Alaric's touch, his voice, his smile. Was she being selfish, allowing these meetings to continue when the kingdom stood on the brink of war? Was there any future in which a king and a stable mistress could find happiness without bringing ruin upon themselves and others? Yet every time she resolved to end it, to tell him tomorrow that they could not meet again, she remembered the look in his eyes when he'd asked if she felt anything in return. The truth was, she did. Something had been growing in her heart, something that had taken root the first time she'd noticed him watching her with those thoughtful eyes, something that had bloomed when he spoke her name. Morning came too soon, bringing with it a flurry of activity. Knights arrived at the stables demanding their war horses be prepared for training exercises. Messengers galloped in and out of the castle gates. The air thrummed with tension and purpose, the unmistakable atmosphere of a kingdom preparing for conflict. "The king has called a full council meeting," Sir Roderick, the master of horse, informed Isabella as he inspected the destriers. "Edivane has moved troops to within a day's ride of our northern villages." Isabella nodded, keeping her expression neutral even as her heart raced. "The stables will be ready for whatever is required, sir." Throughout the day she caught snippets of castle gossip. The king was sending emissaries to neighboring kingdoms seeking alliances. Supply wagons were being assembled. The royal armorer was working day and night to repair and craft weaponry. War, it seemed, was not a possibility, but an inevitability. And through it all, Isabella counted the hours until dusk, torn between dread and longing. When the time finally came, she slipped away from the stables, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen heading toward the royal gardens. Alaric was waiting, his face grave, the carefree man of yesterday replaced by a monarch bearing the weight of impending conflict. "You've heard, I assume," he said without preamble as she approached. "That Edivane moves against us?" "Yes." She remained standing, arms folded protectively across her chest. "The entire castle speaks of nothing else." He rubbed a hand across his face, a gesture of weariness she'd never seen him make in public. "I knew there would be consequences. I didn't expect them to move so quickly." "Did you truly believe they would simply accept the insult and do nothing?" "No." His eyes met hers. "But I had hoped for time. Time for negotiations, for tempers to cool." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "Time for us." The words hung between them, fraught with implication. Isabella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air.
Perhaps there shouldn't be an us, she said quietly, not with the kingdom at stake. Do you think I haven't thought of that? His voice was raw with emotion. Do you think I don't lie awake questioning my sanity, my judgment, my very character? He stepped closer. But then I see you, and I know with absolute certainty that I made the only choice I could live with. Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes. A king cannot make choices based on his heart alone. No, he agreed softly, but neither can he rule effectively with a heart divided against itself. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle yet insistent. I don't regret my decision, Isabella. Whatever comes, I would make the same choice again. As they stood there, connected by touch and gaze and unspoken feeling, neither noticed the shadowy figure once again observing from a distance. Morven Fletcher had returned, his suspicions confirmed. This time he had brought parchment and ink. Carefully, he sketched what he saw, the king and the stable mistress, hands clasped in the royal garden. Evidence, proof, a weapon to be wielded at the right moment, against the right target. The seeds of betrayal were sown, waiting only for the proper season to bear their bitter fruit. Dawn broke over Dorneval with an ominous red glow that painted the castle walls the color of blood. Isabella woke earlier than usual, troubled by dreams she couldn't quite remember. The sound of hoofbeats in the courtyard drew her to the window. A contingent of soldiers was preparing to ride out, their armor glinting dully in the early morning light. War preparations were accelerating. It had been a week since the king's fateful decision, a week of clandestine meetings in the garden, of whispered conversations and lingering glances. A week of growing closer even as the world around them grew more dangerous. Isabella dressed quickly and hurried to the stables. The atmosphere was charged with tension as grooms prepared war horses and knights barked orders. Sir Roderick spotted her and beckoned urgently. Mistress Morgan, the Northern Patrol returned an hour ago. Edivane forces have crossed the border near Oakvale. They've burned 3 villages already. Isabella felt her blood run cold. The villagers? Those who could flee did so. The rest, he didn't need to finish. The implication was clear enough. What does the king say? She asked, working to keep her voice neutral. A war council has been called. Every available knight is to prepare for deployment by midday. Sir Roderick's weathered face was grim. This is no border skirmish, Isabella. This is war. Throughout the morning, Isabella worked mechanically, her mind elsewhere. The stable hands sensed her mood and gave her space, speaking only when necessary. By midday, the first battalions were riding out, their expressions somber but determined. Among them was Sir Roderick, who paused to bid her farewell. "Take care of my Thunderheart," he said, referring to his prized stallion, currently recovering from a hoof injury. "I'll be back for him when he's healed." Isabella nodded, her throat tight. "Godspeed, Sir Roderick." As the day wore on, rumors spread through the castle like wildfire. Edivane's forces were larger than anticipated. King Rowan himself was leading the charge. Princess Eleonora had sworn vengeance for her humiliation. Each report seemed more dire than the last. As dusk approached, Isabella debated whether to go to the garden. Their meetings had become a lifeline in the chaos, but with the situation deteriorating so rapidly, would he even come? Should they continue this dangerous dance when the kingdom was under attack? Her doubts were still unresolved when a page appeared at the stable door, out of breath from running. "Mistress Morgan," he gasped, "the king commands your presence. In his private chambers. Immediately." Isabella's heart lurched. To be summoned so openly, to the royal apartments no less, would certainly spark gossip. Did he say why? "No, ma'am. Only that it was urgent." With trepidation, she followed the page through the castle, acutely aware of the curious glances and whispers that followed her passage. The royal wing was a flurry of activity, advisors, messengers, and military officers coming and going in a constant stream. The page led her not to the king's study, but to a smaller, more secluded chamber adjacent to it. He knocked once, then departed without waiting for a response. After a moment's hesitation, Isabella entered. Alaric stood by the fireplace, still dressed in the formal attire he'd worn for the war council. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. You came, he said, as if he doubted she would. You summoned me, Your Majesty. I had little choice. Her tone was more formal than it had been during their garden meetings. He caught the shift immediately. You're angry. Not angry. Concerned. She remained near the door, maintaining distance between them. To summon me here now, when the castle is in such turmoil. People will talk. Let them. He dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. Edivane has attacked our villages, killed our people. What the court thinks of my private affairs seems rather insignificant in comparison. Isabella felt a flicker of irritation. That's easy for you to say. You're the king. I'm the one who will be called. She stopped herself. Called what? He pressed. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. He crossed the room to stand before her. What would they call you, Isabella? She met his gaze steadily. The king's whore. The commoner who beguiled him into rejecting the treaty. The reason for the war. Her voice was flat. Take your pick. Pain flashed across his features. Is that what you believe? That you're to blame for this? Aren't I? At least partly. She moved away from him, needing space to think clearly. If you hadn't developed feelings for me, I would have been trapped in a loveless political marriage while Edivane plotted against us anyway. He completed her thought with a different ending than she'd intended. Isabella, you must understand, Rowan of Edivane has coveted Dorneval's resources for years. The marriage alliance was merely a ploy to gain a foothold in our kingdom. War was inevitable, whether I married his daughter or not. She turned to face him. Then why agree to the betrothal in the first place? Politics. He sighed heavily. My advisors convinced me it would buy us time to strengthen our defenses. Then I realized what it would cost me personally, and I couldn't go through with it. He approached her again, more cautiously this time. But that's not why I called you here. Why then? His expression grew serious. I'm leaving at first light, leading our forces to meet Edivane's army before they can advance further into our territory. The news hit Isabella like a physical blow. You're going to battle? Yourself? I must. A king cannot ask his men to fight and die while he remains safe behind castle walls. His voice was resolute. But before I go, there are things I need to say to you. Things I may not have another chance to tell you. The implication, that he might not return, hung heavy in the air between them. Isabella felt her anger dissolve, replaced by a cold dread that settled in her stomach like a stone. Don't, she whispered. Don't speak as if you're saying goodbye. I must be realistic. War is unpredictable. He took her hands in his, and this time she didn't pull away. Isabella, these past days with you have been the only true happiness I've known as king. Before you, my life was duty and obligation. You reminded me that I am still a man beneath the crown. Tears threatened, but she fought them back. A man who has responsibilities to his kingdom, to his people. Yes, and I will fulfill those responsibilities. His grip on her hands tightened. But I want you to know that whatever happens, my feelings for you are real. Not infatuation, not madness, as some have suggested. Real. Isabella felt something break open inside her, a dam holding back emotions she'd been trying to contain. I'm afraid, she admitted. For the kingdom, for you. I know. He lifted one hand to her cheek, his touch gentle. I am too, but I've made arrangements. If the worst should happen, don't say that, she interrupted. If the worst should happen, he continued firmly, you will be protected. Lady Elspeth knows of my feelings for you. She will ensure your safety. Isabella was startled. Lady Elspeth? The Dowager Countess? The king's maternal aunt was known for her sharp tongue and sharper intellect, a formidable woman who bowed to no one, not even her royal nephew. She's more understanding than you might think, and she's no friend to Edivane. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She actually approves of you, though she's never met you. Says any woman who can handle spirited horses can probably handle a stubborn king. Despite everything, Isabella found herself smiling at that. She sounds remarkable. She is. His expression sobered. Isabella, I don't know what the future holds. I can't promise you anything beyond this moment. But I want you to know that if I survive this war, things will be different. I won't hide what I feel for you any longer. The weight of his words settled around her shoulders like a mantle. What are you saying? I'm saying that when I return, if I return, I intend to court you properly, openly, regardless of what the court thinks. Isabella stepped back, overwhelmed. Your Majesty, Alaric, he corrected gently. Alaric, she conceded. What you're suggesting is impossible. The nobles would never accept a commoner as your consort. Some wouldn't. Others might surprise you. His gaze was steady. But I'm tired of living my life according to what's expected rather than what's right. Aren't you? Before she could answer, a knock at the door interrupted them. A voice called out, Your Majesty, Lord Harwick requests your presence urgently. New intelligence has arrived from the northern front. Alaric closed his eyes briefly, visibly struggling between duty and desire. Tell him I'll be there shortly, he called back. When they were alone again, he looked at Isabella with such intensity that she felt it like a physical touch. I must go. I know. She straightened her shoulders, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. Your kingdom needs you now. He took her face in his hands and kissed her. Their first kiss, possibly their last. It was gentle yet desperate, tender yet passionate, a contradiction like the man himself. When they broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Wait for me, he whispered against her lips. I will, she promised, meaning it with her whole heart despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. After he left, Isabella remained in the chamber for several minutes, composing herself before facing the castle's curious eyes again. As she finally turned to leave, she noticed a book on a small table near the door, a volume of poetry with a ribbon marking a specific page. She opened it and found a pressed flower, a sprig of jasmine from the garden where they had met so many evenings. Beneath it, a note in the king's hand, for the moments we cannot share. The simple gesture undid her composure once more. Clutching the book to her chest, Isabella allowed herself the tears she had been holding back. Tomorrow, the man she loved would ride to war. Tomorrow, the future of the kingdom, and their love, would hang in the balance. But tonight she had this moment, this token, this promise to hold on to. Unknown to her, Morven Fletcher stood in the shadows of the corridor, watching as she emerged from the king's private chambers, eyes red-rimmed, a book clutched in her hands. His thin lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. The king was leaving for battle, which meant the castle would be vulnerable. The time was ripe for his plan. That very night, while the castle prepared for the king's departure, Morven sat in his quarters by candlelight, composing a letter addressed to King Rowan of Edivane. In it, he detailed the relationship between King Alaric and the stable mistress, suggesting that this common woman was the real reason behind the treaty's rejection. He included his sketches as proof, along with details of Dorneval's military deployments and weaknesses in the castle's defenses. The betrayal, once merely a seed in his mind, had taken root and grown into a full-blown conspiracy. By morning, his messenger would be on the road to Edivane, carrying information that could change the course of the war and seal the fate of a king and the woman he loved. Dawn arrived with the sound of armored men assembling in the courtyard. Isabella had barely slept, the weight of Alaric's parting words and the book of poetry he'd given her keeping her thoughts in constant motion throughout the night. She rose before the sun, drawn to the window by the metallic clangor of an army preparing for war. Below, bathed in torchlight, the king's forces gathered. Knights in gleaming armor sat astride powerful destriers, squires rushed to make final preparations, and foot soldiers stood in orderly formation. The scene was both magnificent and terrible, men preparing to fight, perhaps to die, for their kingdom. Isabella dressed quickly and made her way to the stables, where chaos reigned as the last of the war horses were being readied. Bess met her at the door, her young face pinched with worry. They say the king himself leads them, she said, falling into step beside Isabella. Is it true? Yes. Isabella kept her voice steady. betraying none of the turmoil within. His Majesty rides with the vanguard. Then God help us all, Bess murmured, crossing herself. If he falls, he won't. Isabella cut her off with unexpected sharpness. King Alaric is an experienced warrior. He fought in the Eastern campaigns before his coronation. Bess looked startled by her vehemence but said nothing more as they set about their duties, preparing the remaining horses for the journey ahead. An hour later, a hush fell over the courtyard as King Alaric emerged from the castle. He wore full battle armor, his royal surcoat emblazoned with the silver hawk of Dorneval. A crown-shaped helmet was tucked under one arm, his sword at his hip. Even from a distance, Isabella could see the transformation. The man she had come to know in the garden had been replaced by a warrior king, his face set with grim determination. She stood in the shadows of the stable doorway, watching as he addressed his troops. His voice carried across the courtyard, strong and confident. Men of Dorneval, today we ride not for glory, not for conquest, but for the protection of our homes and families. Edivane has brought war to our doorstep, burning our villages and threatening our people. We will show them the error of their ways. A cheer went up from the assembled soldiers. Alaric raised his hand for silence. I do not ask you to follow where I will not lead. We ride together, we fight together, and God willing, we return together. Another roar of approval. Isabella felt her heart swell with pride and fear in equal measure. This was the man she loved, courageous, determined, willing to risk everything for his kingdom. As the speech concluded and Alaric prepared to mount his horse, his gaze swept the courtyard. For a brief moment, his eyes found hers in the shadowed doorway. No one else would have noticed the slight pause, the almost imperceptible nod. It was not the farewell either of them would have chosen, but it was all they could have under the circumstances. Then he was astride his massive white charger, helmet in place, the very image of a storybook king. A horn sounded, and the gates of the castle swung open. With the thunder of hooves and the clatter of armor, the army of Dorneval rode forth to meet their enemy. Isabella watched until the last rider had passed through the gates, until the dust had settled and the sound of their departure had faded into the distance. Only then did she allow herself a moment of weakness, leaning against the stable wall, eyes closed, offering a silent prayer for their safe return. Mistress Morgan? The voice startled her. She turned to find Lady Elspeth, the Dowager Countess, standing a few feet away. Though well into her 6th decade, the king's aunt stood straight as a lance, her silver hair elegantly coiffed beneath a velvet cap, her dark blue gown simple but clearly expensive. My lady. Isabella dropped into a curtsy, mind racing. Had Alaric truly confided in this formidable woman about their relationship? No need for that, Lady Elspeth said with a dismissive wave. I'm too old for such formalities, and I suspect we have more important matters to discuss. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. Isabella fell into step beside the older woman, acutely aware of her own plain dress and work-roughened hands next to Lady Elspeth's refinement. They walked in silence until they reached a small herb garden tucked away in a quiet corner of the castle grounds. Lady Elspeth settled on a stone bench and motioned for Isabella to join her. My nephew speaks highly of you, she said without preamble, her keen eyes studying Isabella's face. He seems to think you're extraordinary. Isabella felt her cheeks warm. His Majesty is kind. Alaric is many things, but kind is not the word I would choose. Stubborn comes to mind. Reckless, perhaps. A smile softened her words. But he has a good heart, and he sees clearly when his vision isn't clouded by duty. Isabella remained silent, unsure how to respond. He told me about your friendship, Lady Elspeth continued. About his intentions should he return from this campaign. My lady, Let me finish. The Countess held up a hand. I've watched my nephew sacrifice his happiness for this kingdom since he was a boy. I've seen him make the difficult choices, the right choices, time and again. When he rejected the Edivane alliance, I was surprised but not displeased. That match was a serpent in disguise. She paused, her gaze drifting to the distant horizon where the army had disappeared. What I did not expect was to learn that he had found love with a horse mistress. Her eyes returned to Isabella, sharp and assessing. It is unconventional, to say the least. Impossible, you mean? Isabella said quietly. Lady Elspeth's eyebrow arched. Is that what you believe? It's what I know. A king cannot marry a commoner. Cannot? Or has not? The Countess leaned forward. History is written by those brave enough to challenge what others claim cannot be done. Isabella shook her head. The court would never accept me. The court, Lady Elspeth scoffed. A collection of preening peacocks who contribute nothing but gossip and intrigue. Half of them would sell Dorneval to our enemies for a title and a bag of gold. Her expression softened slightly. But you're right that it would not be easy. Which brings me to why I sought you out today. She reached into a small pouch at her waist and withdrew a sealed letter. Alaric asked me to give you this, should anything happen to him in battle. Isabella stared at the letter, a cold dread settling in her stomach. I don't want it. None of us wants to contemplate the worst, but we must be prepared for it nonetheless. Lady Elspeth pressed the letter into Isabella's reluctant hand. He also asked me to ensure your safety and well-being, no matter the outcome of this war. I don't need protection, Isabella protested. Don't you? The Countess's voice was gentle but firm. A commoner who has captured the king's heart? There are those in court who would see you as a threat, especially if Alaric falls and his cousin Edric assumes the throne. Isabella had not considered this possibility. Prince Edric, the king's distant cousin and heir presumptive, was known for his conservative views and disdain for the lower classes. What would you have me do, my lady? She asked, suddenly feeling the precariousness of her position. For now, continue your duties. Draw no undue attention to yourself, but know that my door is open to you, should you need sanctuary. Lady Elspeth rose from the bench. And keep that letter close. It contains not only his words to you, but certain provisions for your future. As the Countess turned to leave, Isabella found her voice again. My lady, why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Lady Elspeth paused, looking back over her shoulder. I know that my nephew loves you. I know that you've given him something he's never had before, the courage to choose his own path. And I know the look of a woman in love. A smile touched her lips. It's the same look I once wore, many years ago, for a man my father deemed unsuitable. What happened? Isabella couldn't help asking. I defied him and married my love anyway. We had 20 wonderful years together before illness took him. The Countess's eyes grew distant with memory. Not once did I regret my choice. With that, she departed, leaving Isabella alone with the sealed letter and thoughts that tumbled like leaves in a storm. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. The castle, emptied of its fighting men, took on a different character. Women who had never before lifted more than an embroidery needle now supervised the movement of supplies. Elderly men trained boys too young for battle in the rudiments of defense. Isabella found herself elevated from mere stable mistress to supervisor of all transportation, responsible for maintaining the horses needed to carry messages and supplies to and from the front. News from the battlefield came in fragments. A messenger here, a wounded soldier there. The king's forces had engaged Edavane's army near the border. The fighting was fierce but inconclusive. Alaric was alive and uninjured. The enemy had superior numbers but not superior tactics. Each night, Isabella would return to her small chamber exhausted from the day's labors, yet sleep eluded her. She would read Alaric's poetry book by candlelight, fingers tracing the dried jasmine blossom, wondering where he was and if he was safe. The sealed letter remained under her pillow, unopened. To break the seal felt too much like accepting the possibility of his death. On the 7th day after the army's departure, Isabella was overseeing the loading of supply wagons when a commotion at the castle gates drew her attention. A rider had arrived, his horse lathered and nearly spent from hard riding. The man himself was barely better off, swaying in the saddle, his uniform caked with blood and dirt. "Urgent message for the castle steward," he called as guards helped him dismount. Isabella approached, recognizing the rider as one of the king's personal messengers. "Sir Giles, what news?" The messenger's face was grave. "Mistress Morgan, We've been betrayed. Somehow Edivane knew our strategies before we implemented them. They anticipated our every move. He lowered his voice. The king suspects a traitor within the castle walls. Cold fear washed over her. Is His Majesty alive, thank God, though we've suffered heavy losses? Sir Giles winced, clutching his side where blood seeped through his tunic. But there's more. The enemy forces are splitting. Half remain engaged with us, while the other half circle around toward Dornoval itself. The king sent me to warn you. The castle must prepare for siege. The news spread through Dornoval like wildfire. Panic threatened as townspeople streamed toward the castle seeking protection, bringing what provisions they could carry. Lady Elspeth took command, her years of experience bringing order to chaos. Isabella found herself working alongside the Countess, organizing the influx of refugees, ensuring that the castle's defenses were as ready as they could be with their limited forces. It was nearing midnight when Isabella finally returned to the stables, checking on the horses one last time before seeking her own rest. The familiar smell of hay and horseflesh was comforting amid the day's turmoil. As she extinguished the lantern and turned to leave, a shadow detached itself from the darkness near the door. "Working late, Mistress Morgan?" She recognized the voice of Morven Fletcher, the understeward. There had always been something about the man that made her uneasy. A calculating look in his eyes, perhaps, or the way he seemed to appear unexpectedly in places he had no reason to be. "Master Fletcher, what brings you to the stables at this hour?" He stepped closer, and in the dim moonlight filtering through the windows, she could see an unpleasant smile playing about his thin lips. "Curiosity, mostly. I've been wondering what quality a simple stable mistress could possess that would make a king reject a princess and risk his kingdom." His eyes raked over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I must admit, I don't see it." Isabella stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about. If you'll excuse me." "Oh, I think you do." He moved to block her path. "I've seen you with him. In the gardens. The king's whore. They're calling you in the servants' quarters." Anger flashed through her, hot and sudden. "Stand aside." "You know what's interesting?" Morven continued as if she hadn't spoken. King Rowan of Edivane was quite interested to learn about the king's distractions. Quite interested indeed. The implication hit Isabella like a physical blow. "You," she whispered, "you're the traitor." Morven's smile widened. "Traitor is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of myself as a man who recognizes opportunity. Edivane pays well for valuable information. You've doomed our soldiers, our king." Horror and rage warred within her. "Why? What did Dornoval ever do to earn such hatred from you?" "Dornoval?" He laughed, a bitter sound. "This kingdom has kept me in servitude while lesser men rose to positions of power. I was meant for greater things than fetching wine for drunken nobles." His expression hardened. "But soon, very soon, I'll have wealth enough to go anywhere, be anyone. And you, my dear, won't be alive to see it." His hand moved to his belt, where a dagger gleamed in the moonlight. "A pity, really. You're not unattractive for a common woman, but Edivane wants proof that the king's lover is dead. Insurance that Alaric will be properly distracted when he learns the news." Isabella backed away, mind racing. She was alone in the stables, too far from the main castle for her cries to be heard. Morven was smaller than her, but the dagger gave him a deadly advantage. Her eyes darted around the stable, seeking anything that might serve as a weapon. A pitchfork leaned against the wall several feet away, too far. A bucket, useless. Then her gaze fell on the stall behind Morven, where Thunderheart, Sir Roderick's injured stallion, watched with alert eyes. "You won't get away with this," she said, trying to keep her voice steady as she edged sideways. "Even if you kill me, they'll hunt you down." "Will they? In the chaos of a siege?" Morven advanced slowly. "I think not. By the time anyone realizes what's happened, I'll be far from here, living like the nobleman I should have been born as." Isabella reached the stall door. In one swift motion, she yanked it open and slapped Thunderheart hard on his flank. "Hiya!" The startled stallion burst from the stall, nearly trampling Morven, who cursed and stumbled backward. Isabella seized her moment, grabbing the pitchfork and brandishing it like a spear. "Drop the dagger," she commanded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Morven's face twisted with hatred. "You think you've won? Edavain's forces will be here within days, and when the king learns of your death, he'll be careless in battle. He'll fall, and everything he loves will fall with him." "I said drop it." Isabella advanced, the pitchfork aimed at his chest. For a moment, she thought he would comply. Then, with a snarl of rage, he lunged at her. Isabella reacted instinctively, thrusting the pitchfork forward. The tines caught Morven in the shoulder. Not a fatal wound, but enough to make him howl with pain and drop the dagger. "Guards!" she shouted, hoping someone was near enough to hear. "Treason! Guards!" Morven, clutching his bleeding shoulder, looked around wildly, then fled toward the stable door. Isabella pursued, pitchfork still in hand, her voice rising in a continuous call for help. Outside, her cries finally drew attention. 2 guards appeared, weapons drawn. "Seize him!" Isabella gasped, pointing at the fleeing figure of Morven. "He's a traitor. He's been sending information to Edavain." The guards took off in pursuit as Isabella sank to her knees, the pitchfork clattering to the ground beside her. The realization of how close she had come to death washed over her in a cold wave. But stronger than fear was a burning determination. She had to get word to Alaric, had to warn him that the betrayal ran deeper than he knew, that his life was in even greater danger than he realized. Rising unsteadily to her feet, Isabella turned toward the castle, where lights now blazed from windows as people responded to the commotion. A traitor had been discovered, a plot foiled. But the greater threat, Edavain's approaching army, still loomed on the horizon. And somewhere on a distant battlefield, the man she loved fought on, unaware that both his kingdom and his heart hung in the balance. The castle of Dorneval had transformed overnight from a royal residence to a fortress preparing for siege. Blacksmiths hammered through the night, repairing ancient armor for anyone strong enough to bear it. Women melted down pewter dishes to cast arrowheads. Children as young as 7 carried buckets of water to fill the cisterns and barrels of grain to stock the storerooms. Isabella stood in Lady Elspeth's private chambers, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, her encounter with Morven having left little time for rest or changing. The Dowager Countess sat behind a massive oak desk covered with maps and correspondence, her silver hair pulled back severely, dark circles beneath her shrewd eyes suggesting she too had not slept. "Tell me again exactly what he said," Lady Elspeth commanded, quill poised over parchment. Isabella recounted Morven's confession for the 3rd time, each retelling making the betrayal more real, more infuriating. "He admitted sending information to Edavain about our troop movements, and about the king and me." Lady Elspeth's quill scratched across the parchment, recording these details with military precision. "And you're certain he mentioned wanting proof of your death? Those exact words?" "Yes, my lady. He said Edavain wanted insurance that King Alaric would be distracted in battle." Isabella's voice wavered slightly at the memory of the dagger gleaming in the moonlight. "He meant to kill me and somehow ensure the king knew of it." "A shrewd strategy," Lady Elspeth murmured almost admiringly. "Evil, but shrewd. A grief-stricken commander makes fatal errors." "Did they capture him? Morven?" Isabella had been so overwhelmed by the night's events that she hadn't yet learned the traitor's fate. "No." Lady Elspeth's mouth tightened with displeasure. "He managed to wound one of the guards and escape through the postern gate. We must assume he's making his way to Edavain's forces even now, carrying whatever information he hasn't already sold." Isabella sank into a chair, the weight of this news pressing down on her. "Then the king is still in danger. He doesn't know the full extent of what's been revealed." "Indeed." The Countess set down her quill. "Which is why I've decided to send you to him." "Me?" Isabella straightened in surprise. "But how? The roads must be watched by Edavain's scouts." "Not all roads are visible to those who don't know where to look." Lady Elspeth rose and moved to a large tapestry depicting a hunting scene. She pulled it aside to reveal a map of Dorneval and its surrounding territories. There are old paths through the western hills, smugglers' routes my late husband showed me during the border disputes of King Malcolm's reign. They're treacherous, barely passable in places, but invisible from the main roads. Isabella studied the map, tracing the faint lines that wound through the mountainous region west of the castle. You're suggesting I take these paths to reach the king's camp? With a small escort, 2 of my most trusted men. Light, fast, and quiet. Lady Elspeth's eyes met Isabella's. You're an excellent rider, I'm told. And you know the king's forces will need every advantage against Edivane, especially now that we know the extent of Morven's treachery. When would I leave? Isabella asked, decision already made. The chance to warn Alaric, to see him again. There was no question of refusing. Tonight, after sunset, the Countess returned to her desk. Captain Thorne is preparing the horses now. Special mounts, mountain-bred, sure-footed, and with remarkable endurance. Isabella nodded, mind already racing ahead to practical concerns. I should return to the stables then, make arrangements for my absence. There's one more thing. Lady Elspeth's voice had softened slightly. This mission carries significant risk. Edivane's forces are between us and the king's position. If you're captured... She didn't need to finish the thought. I understand. Isabella met the older woman's gaze steadily. But I have to try. If there's any chance I can help him, help Dorneval, it's worth the risk. A rare smile crossed Lady Elspeth's face. My nephew chose well, it seems. You have courage, Mistress Morgan. She pulled open a drawer in her desk and withdrew a small object wrapped in velvet. Take this. It may prove useful if you encounter trouble. Isabella unwrapped the cloth to reveal a ring bearing the royal seal of Dorneval, a silver hawk in flight. Her eyes widened. My lady, I couldn't possibly... It's not the king's official seal, but a duplicate my brother had made for private correspondence. Still, it carries enough authority to command respect from any loyal subject of Dorneval. The Countess closed Isabella's fingers around the ring. Use it wisely, and only if necessary. Thank you. Isabella slipped the ring onto a leather cord and tied it around her neck, tucking it beneath her bodice. I won't fail him, or you. See that you don't. Lady Elspeth's tone was brisk once more. Now go. Captain Thorne will meet you at the western postern gate at sunset. Travel light, and tell no one of your destination. As Isabella left the Countess's chambers, the full magnitude of what lay ahead settled upon her shoulders. She was no warrior, no spy. She was a stable mistress venturing into the heart of a war to deliver crucial information, and perhaps to save the life of the man she loved. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Isabella delegated her stable duties to Bess, claiming she had been assigned to a special task by Lady Elspeth, true enough, if incomplete. She gathered minimal provisions, sturdy clothing, and a small dagger Sir Roderick had once given her for protection. The book of poetry with its pressed jasmine flower she carefully wrapped and tucked into her innermost pocket, close to her heart. As dusk fell, she made her way to the western postern gate where Captain Thorne awaited with 2 other riders. All 3 were dressed not as soldiers, but as common travelers, their weapons concealed beneath plain cloaks. 3 mountain ponies stamped impatiently, laden with small packs but no identifying markers of Dorneval. Mistress Morgan. Captain Thorne nodded respectfully. A veteran of many campaigns, his weathered face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes were kind. Lady Elspeth briefed you on our route? Yes, Captain. Isabella mounted her pony with practiced ease. We follow the smugglers' paths through the western hills, then cross the River Alder at the shallow ford near the abandoned mill. Good. He handed her a folded map. Memorize this, then destroy it. If we're separated, make for this point. He indicated a small clearing marked with a cross. It's a woodcutter's hut, abandoned now but still sound. Wait there no more than 2 days. Isabella nodded, studying the map intently, committing the route to memory. And if I'm captured? The captain's expression grew grim. The ring Lady Elspeth gave you may offer some protection. If not, he hesitated. We carry poison, small amounts, meant for a quick and dignified end. should the alternative be worse. A chill ran down Isabella's spine, but she accepted the tiny vial he offered, tucking it into her boot. Let us hope it doesn't come to that. Indeed. Captain Thorne mounted his own pony. Let's move out. We need to clear the valley before full dark. They slipped from the castle like shadows, avoiding the main roads where refugees still streamed toward Dornival's promised protection. Once clear of the immediate surroundings, Captain Thorne led them into the dense forest that covered the western foothills. The path, if it could be called that, was barely visible, a game trail at best, choked with underbrush and crossed by fallen trees. The mountain ponies proved their worth, picking their way sure-footedly through obstacles that would have defeated larger horses. Isabella, despite her experience, found herself challenged by the difficult terrain. They rode in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as darkness fell completely, the forest canopy blocking even the faint light of the crescent moon. After several hours of slow progress, Captain Thorne called a halt in a small clearing. "We'll rest the horses briefly," he said in a low voice. "No fire, cold rations only." Isabella dismounted stiffly, her muscles protesting the unaccustomed strain. One of the men, Sir Edmund, she had learned, offered her a water skin and a strip of dried meat. "How much farther tonight?" she asked between bites. "Another 2 hours to the hill caves," Captain Thorne replied. "We'll shelter there until dawn, then continue to the river crossing." Sir Edmund glanced nervously at the dark forest surrounding them. "We're still too close to the castle for my liking. Edavane's scouts could be anywhere, which is why we keep moving." The captain remounted. "Stay alert, stay quiet, and pray for clear weather. These paths become death traps when wet." They continued their journey, the forest growing denser, the path steeper as they climbed into the hills. Twice they had to dismount and lead the ponies through particularly treacherous stretches, where one misstep could mean a fatal fall down a rocky slope. Isabella's thoughts turned to Alaric as they rode. Was he safe? Was he thinking of her as she was of him? The memory of their last kiss burned bright in her mind, giving her strength when her body wanted to surrender to exhaustion. It was near midnight when they finally reached the hill caves, a series of small caverns carved into a limestone bluff. Captain Thorne led them to the largest, barely visible behind a screen of vegetation. "We'll rest here until first light," he said, helping Isabella dismount. "Sir Edmund will take first watch, then Sir Gareth, then myself. We leave at dawn." Inside the cave, Isabella sank gratefully onto the rough ground, using her saddle as a pillow. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Every sound from the forest outside, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the night breeze, made her tense, imagining Edavane's soldiers discovering their hiding place. Finally, she withdrew Alaric's book of poetry, running her fingers over the tooled leather binding. She couldn't read in the darkness, but the familiar feel of it brought comfort. She imagined him reading these same pages, his fingers touching where hers now rested. The thought brought both pain and determination. She would reach him. She had to. Dawn arrived with a fine mist that shrouded the hills in ghostly white. They broke their fast with dried fruit and hard cheese, then continued their journey. The path grew even more challenging as they descended toward the river valley, the rain-slicked stones threatening to send the ponies tumbling with each step. By midday, they reached the River Alder, swollen with recent rains but still fordable at the point Lady Elspeth had indicated. On the opposite bank lay territory already contested by Dornival and Edavane forces. "From here we must be doubly cautious," Captain Thorne warned as they prepared to cross. "Edavane patrols are likely on this side of the river, and we can't be certain where our own forces have established their lines." Isabella nodded, adjusting her cloak to better conceal her face. "How long to the king's position?" "If we're fortunate and encounter no enemy forces, we could reach him by nightfall." The captain's expression was grim. "If not." They urged their mounts into the rushing water. The ponies struggled against the current, water rising to their bellies at the deepest point. Isabella held her breath, knowing that a fall here could mean being swept downstream into unknown dangers. They had nearly reached the far bank when the sound of voices carried across the water. Captain Thorne raised his hand in warning. signaling them to halt in the shelter of a large boulder protruding from the river. "Edivane Patrol," he whispered, pointing to the tree line where armored men on horseback moved parallel to the river. At least 6, maybe more. Isabella's heart hammered in her chest as they remained motionless, water swirling around their ponies' legs. If the patrol spotted them, there would be nowhere to hide, no escape in the middle of the river. Long minutes passed as the patrol moved slowly along the bank, stopping occasionally to scan the river. Just when Isabella thought they might pass by without incident, one of the soldiers pointed directly at their position, shouting to his companions. "They've seen us," Captain Thorne hissed. "Make for the bank, then scatter into the forest. Rejoin at the woodcutter's hut if you can." They urged their ponies forward, water spraying as they crashed toward the shore. Behind them, the shouts of the Edivane soldiers grew louder. An arrow whistled past Isabella's ear as she reached the bank, her pony scrambling up the muddy incline. "Go!" Sir Edmund cried, drawing his sword and turning to face the approaching soldiers. "We'll hold them off." Isabella hesitated, unwilling to abandon the men who had risked their lives to escort her. "The message must reach the king," Captain Thorne shouted, pulling his own weapon. "Go, Mistress Morgan, for Dornival." With a last anguished look at the brave men preparing to fight against overwhelming odds, Isabella spurred her pony into the forest. Behind her, the clash of steel and cries of battle faded as she rode deeper into the trees, her heart heavy with the knowledge that those loyal men might be giving their lives so that she could complete her mission. Alone now in enemy territory, with only her wits and determination to guide her, Isabella pressed on toward the king's camp, and toward a reunion that would forever change the course of the war, the kingdom, and her own destiny. The forest grew denser as Isabella urged her pony deeper into the wilderness, away from the sounds of battle at the river crossing. Branches whipped at her face, thorns tore at her cloak, but she pressed on, guided by the rough map she had memorized and the position of the sun filtering through the canopy above. She rode for hours, avoiding clearings and open spaces where she might be spotted, taking circuitous routes when she heard distant voices or the movement of troops. By late afternoon, exhaustion began to take its toll. Her pony, though sturdy, showed signs of fatigue, its breathing labored, flanks dark with sweat. "Just a little farther," she murmured, patting the animal's neck as she dismounted to lead it up a particularly steep incline. "We'll rest soon, I promise." At the top of the rise, Isabella paused to get her bearings. According to Captain Thorne's map, the woodcutter's hut should lie somewhere to the northwest, perhaps 2 hours' ride from her current position. Beyond that, another 3 hours to where they believed King Alaric's forces were encamped. If they still were, if they hadn't been forced to retreat, if they weren't already defeated. She pushed these thoughts aside, focusing instead on survival. The day was waning, and she needed shelter for the night. Moving forward on foot, leading her tired mount, Isabella scanned the forest for any sign of the promised hut. The sound of running water drew her to a small stream cutting through the underbrush. Both she and the pony drank deeply, the cold water reviving their flagging spirits. As she straightened, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, Isabella caught sight of something through the trees, a structure, man-made rather than natural. Cautiously, she secured her pony to a tree and moved forward on foot, one hand on the dagger at her belt. As she drew nearer, the structure revealed itself to be a small hut built of rough-hewn logs, its roof partially collapsed but still offering some shelter. The woodcutter's hut, just as Captain Thorne had described. Isabella approached warily, alert for any sign that the hut might be occupied or watched. The door hung askew on leather hinges, the single window shuttered. No smoke rose from the crude chimney, no sound came from within. "Hello?" she called softly, then waited, listening. Nothing but the rustle of leaves and distant bird-song answered her. Steeling herself, she pushed the door open, wincing at the loud creak of the hinges. The interior was dim and musty, a single room containing an old wooden table, a 3-legged stool, and a crude pallet in one corner. Dust covered everything, undisturbed save for the small tracks of woodland creatures who had made their own use of the abandoned shelter. Relief washed over her. The hut was empty, apparently untouched by human hands for months, perhaps years. She returned to fetch her pony, leading it to a small lean-to attached to the rear of the hut where it could rest out of sight. Inside, Isabella set about making the space habitable for the night. She cleared debris from the pallet, shook out her cloak, and arranged her meager supplies on the table. With the door secured as best she could, and night falling rapidly, she allowed herself to relax slightly for the first time since leaving Dorneval. But relaxation brought with it the emotions she had been holding at bay. Fear for Captain Thorn and his men, worry for Alaric, uncertainty about her own fate. She sank onto the pallet, suddenly overwhelmed. From her pocket, she withdrew Alaric's book of poetry, opening it to where the pressed jasmine flower marked his favorite verse. In the fading light, she could just make out the words. Though kingdoms fall and mountains crumble to the sea, what lies between our souls shall never conquered be. Tears welled in her eyes. She had never imagined herself in such a position, a commoner risking everything for a king, for a kingdom, for love. It seemed like something from a minstrel's tale, not the life of a stable mistress from Dorneval. The sound of hoofbeats outside jolted her from her reverie. Isabella leapt to her feet, dagger drawn, heart pounding. Had Edevain's soldiers found her? Or worse, had Morven tracked her somehow, determined to complete his mission of eliminating the king's lover? She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, ready to strike if necessary. The hoofbeats slowed, then stopped. Footsteps approached, heavy but cautious. "Mistress Morgan?" A familiar voice called softly. "Are you there?" Isabella nearly collapsed with relief. "Captain Thorn?" She unbarred the door to find the captain standing there, bloodied but alive. One arm hung awkwardly at his side, and a deep cut marred his weathered cheek, but his eyes were alert and determined. "Thank God," she breathed, helping him inside. "I feared the worst. Sir Edmund and Sir Gareth?" Captain Thorn's expression darkened as he lowered himself onto the stool. "Sir Gareth fell. Sir Edmund was captured. I escaped only because my horse was faster than their arrows." He winced as he attempted to move his injured arm. "But I lost them in the forest. I don't think I was followed." Isabella fetched her waterskin and a strip of clean cloth from her pack. "Let me tend to that arm." As she cleaned and bound his wounds, the captain filled her in on what had happened after their separation. The Edevain patrol had been larger than they initially thought, 10 men in all. Despite being outnumbered, the Dorneval men had fought bravely, allowing Isabella time to escape. Sir Gareth died well, with his sword in his hand, Captain Thorn said grimly. As for Sir Edmund, if he's fortunate, they'll ransom him rather than execute him as a spy. And the king's forces? Do you still believe we can reach them by tomorrow? Isabella asked, tying off the bandage around his arm. If we leave at first light and encounter no further patrols, yes. He studied her face in the dim light. You should rest now. Tomorrow will test us both. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully to Isabella that night. Every sound from the forest outside startled her awake. Was it another patrol? A wild animal? Or merely the wind in the trees? Captain Thorn slept sitting up against the wall, his good hand resting on the hilt of his sword, ready to wake at the slightest provocation. Dawn arrived with a fine drizzle that promised to make their journey even more difficult. They breakfasted on the last of their provisions, a heel of bread, some dried meat, a handful of berries Isabella gathered near the hut. We should reach the king's camp by midday, Captain Thorn said as they prepared to depart, assuming they haven't moved position since my last intelligence. And if they have? Isabella asked, adjusting her pony's saddle girth. Then we follow their trail. King Alaric is a methodical commander. He won't abandon his position without good reason, and he'll leave markers for reinforcements to follow. They set off in the rain, moving more quickly now that they had rested. The forest began to thin as they rode, giving way to rolling hills dotted with stands of oak and ash. In the distance, smoke rose from multiple locations, cook fires or burning villages. It was impossible to tell from this distance. As midday approached, Captain Thorn raised his hand for a halt. They had reached the crest of a hill overlooking a broad valley. Below, partially obscured by trees and the persistent drizzle, they could make out the sprawling encampment of what could only be King Alaric's army. Hundreds of tents arranged in orderly rows, surrounded by hastily constructed palisades, horses picketed in neat lines, soldiers moving about their duties, diminished by distance to toy-like figures. "There," Captain Thorne said, pointing to a large tent flying the royal standard, a silver hawk on a blue field, the king's command pavilion. Isabella's heart leapt at the sight. Alaric was there, so close after days of dangerous travel. But between them and the camp lay open ground, dangerous to cross without being challenged by sentries or worse, spotted by enemy scouts. "How do we approach?" she asked, scanning the perimeter for the safest route. "Directly. At this point, stealth will only make us look like spies or assassins." Captain Thorne straightened in his saddle, wincing slightly as the movement jarred his injured arm. "We ride openly, under a flag of truce, though I'd wager good gold the sentries will recognize me before we need it." They descended the hill at a steady pace, making no attempt to conceal themselves. As they approached the outer perimeter of the camp, shouts went up from the sentries. Armed men moved to intercept them, bows drawn, swords at the ready. "Hold!" Captain Thorne called, raising his good arm. "Captain Thorne of the King's Guard, with urgent news for His Majesty." There was a moment of tense silence as the sentries assessed them. Then one stepped forward, lowering his weapon. "Captain Thorne, we thought you were at the castle with Lady Elspeth." "I was. Now I'm here with critical intelligence for the king." He gestured to Isabella. "This is Mistress Morgan, also bearing urgent news from Dorneval." The sentry's eyes narrowed as he looked at Isabella, taking in her simple clothing, her obvious exhaustion. "The stable mistress? What news could she possibly—" "That is for the king's ears, not yours, soldier." Captain Thorne cut him off sharply. "Now, will you escort us to His Majesty, or shall I report your dereliction of duty, along with my other news?" Properly chastened, the sentry snapped to attention. "Of course, Captain. Follow me." As they were led through the camp, Isabella felt the weight of curious stares from all sides. A woman in the midst of an army camp was unusual enough. A common woman being escorted to the king's pavilion was unprecedented. Whispers followed in their wake, and more than once she heard the words, "the king's whore," hissed just loudly enough for her to hear. She kept her head high, focusing on the royal standard that grew larger as they approached. Nothing mattered now except delivering their warning. Nothing except seeing Alaric again, ensuring he was safe, that he knew the full extent of Morven's betrayal. At the entrance to the command pavilion, they were met by Lord Harwick, the king's chief advisor. His eyebrows rose nearly to his receding hairline at the sight of Isabella. "Captain Thorne," he acknowledged with a nod, "and Mistress Morgan, is it not? This is most irregular." "We bring urgent news from Dorneval, my lord," Captain Thorne replied. "The castle prepares for siege. We've identified the traitor who has been feeding information to Edivane." Lord Harwick's expression sharpened with interest. "Indeed? Come, His Majesty will want to hear this immediately." He led them into the pavilion, a large space divided by hanging tapestries into sections for meetings, meals, and the king's private quarters. In the central area, Alaric stood bent over a table covered with maps, deep in discussion with several officers. He looked up as they entered, his expression changing from concentration to shock as he recognized Isabella. "What in God's name?" he began, then caught himself. "Captain Thorne, Mistress Morgan, this is unexpected." Isabella dropped into a curtsy, suddenly acutely aware of her bedraggled appearance after days of hard travel. "Your Majesty." Alaric dismissed his officers with a curt nod. "Leave us. Lord Harwick, you may stay." When they were alone, he moved toward Isabella, barely restraining himself from reaching for her. "Are you hurt? What are you doing here? The roads between here and Dorneval are crawling with Edivane's forces." "We came by the western hill paths, Your Majesty," Captain Thorne answered. "Lady Elspeth's instruction. We were ambushed at the river crossing. Sir Gareth fell. Sir Edmund was captured." "Lady Elspeth sent you?" Alaric's gaze returned to Isabella, a mixture of concern and something deeper in his eyes. "It must be grave indeed for her to risk you on such a journey." "It is, sire." Isabella found her voice at last. "We've discovered the traitor. It's Morven Fletcher, the understeward. He's been sending detailed information to King Rowan for months. Troop movements, castle defenses, and—" She hesitated, glancing at Lord Harwick. "And?" Alaric prompted. "And information about us, about your majesty and me." The words came out in a rush. "He attacked me in the stables, admitted everything. He meant to kill me and ensure you knew of it, to distract you in battle." Alaric's face darkened with fury. "He dared to lay hands on you?" "I escaped, but he fled the castle. We believe he's making his way to Edavane's forces now, with whatever new intelligence he's gathered." Lord Harwick cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the turn of the conversation. "Sire, if Fletcher has indeed been feeding information to the enemy, it explains how they've anticipated our every move. But we must also consider the other implications of what Mistress Morgan has revealed." "What implications would those be, Lord Harwick?" Alaric's voice was dangerously quiet. The advisor shifted uncomfortably. "Only that if Edavane knows of your majesty's regard for Mistress Morgan, they may attempt to use it against you, as indeed they already have, by targeting her. Then we must ensure her safety." Alaric's tone brooked no argument. "Captain Thorne, you will assign your best men as Mistress Morgan's personal guard. She is not to be left unprotected for a moment." "Yes, sire." Captain Thorne bowed, then withdrew to carry out his orders, leaving Isabella alone with the king and his advisor. Lord Harwick cleared his throat again. "Sire, perhaps I should leave you to speak privately with Mistress Morgan." "Perhaps you should." Alaric's eyes never left Isabella's face. When the advisor had gone, Alaric closed the distance between them in 2 swift strides, gathering her into his arms with a desperation that spoke volumes. "I thought you safe at the castle," he murmured against her hair. "When I imagined the dangers of this war, I never thought you would be riding through enemy territory, risking your life." Isabella leaned into his embrace, weeks of tension and fear melting away at his touch. "I had to warn you, about Morven, about everything he told Edavane. You could have sent a messenger. Any messenger might have been intercepted, and I—" She pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. "I needed to see for myself that you were alive, that you were safe." His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb gently stroking her skin. "My brave, foolish Isabella, do you know what it would do to me if harm came to you because of me? Do you know what it would do to me if harm came to you because I failed to deliver this warning?" she countered. A smile touched his lips, though his eyes remained troubled. "We are well matched in stubbornness, it seems." The smile faded. "But the situation grows more perilous by the day. Edavane's forces outnumber us, and now we learn they've had a spy in our midst all along." "Can you defeat them?" Isabella asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "I must." His expression hardened with determination. "For Dorneval, for our people." His eyes softened as they met hers. "For us." The word hung between them, laden with promise and uncertainty. Us. A future neither of them had dared imagine in detail, too fragile to bear the weight of scrutiny. "Alaric," she began, using his name for the first time since their reunion. "If Edavane knows about me, about us, then they know my greatest strength, not my weakness," he interrupted. "Loving you has made me a better king, a better man. It has given me something real to fight for, beyond abstract notions of duty and honor." He leaned down to kiss her, a gentle meeting of lips that quickly deepened into something more urgent, more desperate. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Here, in the camp. I know it's not ideal, not what you deserve, but—" "Yes," she said simply. "I'll stay, for as long as you need me." Outside the pavilion, the sounds of the camp continued. Men training, horses neighing, the rhythmic clang of the smithy repairing armor and weapons. War surrounded them, threatened to engulf them. But in this moment, in this space, there was only the two of them, a king and the woman who had risked everything to reach him, bound by a love that neither rank nor circumstance nor enemy action could sever. a love that would soon be tested as never before, as the forces of Edivane closed in around them, guided by a traitor who knew all too well the power of striking at the heart rather than the crown. Dawn broke over the military encampment with a chorus of sounds, the metallic ring of weapons being sharpened, the nickering of horses, the low murmur of men preparing for another day of war. Isabella woke in a small tent adjacent to the king's pavilion, where she had been installed after their reunion the previous day. Despite the simplicity of her accommodations, a camp bed, a small trunk for her few possessions, a basin of water for washing, she had slept better than she had in days, knowing Alaric was nearby. A female servant, the only other woman in the camp besides a few camp followers and healers, brought her a simple breakfast and fresh clothing, a riding dress of sturdy fabric, more practical than anything she had owned at the castle. "His Majesty requests your presence in the command tent when you're ready, my lady," the woman said, addressing Isabella with a deference that felt strange after a lifetime of being Mistress Morgan, or simply the stable mistress. "Thank you," Isabella replied, choosing not to correct the title. "Please tell His Majesty I'll join him shortly." As she dressed and prepared herself, Isabella could hear the camp coming fully to life outside her tent. The guards Alaric had assigned to her, 2 burly men-at-arms named Walter and Godfrey, stood watch outside, their shadows visible against the canvas. When she emerged, Walter nodded respectfully. "Morning, Mistress Morgan. We'll escort you to the king." The walk through the camp was an exercise in dignity. Isabella kept her head high despite the stares and whispers that followed their progress. Some looks were merely curious, others openly hostile or speculative. Word had spread quickly about the stable mistress who had risked the dangerous journey to bring intelligence to the king, and about the king's obvious regard for her. In the command pavilion, she found Alaric deep in council with his senior officers. Maps covered the large central table, weighted down with daggers and cups. The atmosphere was tense, faces grim as they discussed strategy. Alaric looked up as she entered, his expression softening momentarily before returning to the stern demeanor required of a wartime leader. "Gentlemen, I believe you all know Mistress Morgan by now. Her information regarding the traitor Fletcher has proven invaluable." The officers acknowledged her with varying degrees of warmth, from Sir Roderick's friendly nod to Lord Harwick's barely concealed disapproval. "We were just discussing our next move," Alaric continued, gesturing for Isabella to join them at the table. "Edivane's forces have split, as we now know. Half continue to engage us here, while the other half move toward Dorneval itself. The castle is preparing for siege," Isabella said, remembering Lady Elspeth's efficient command of the defenses. "But they cannot hold indefinitely." "No," Alaric agreed grimly, "which is why we must force a decisive engagement here, defeat this portion of Rowan's army, and then march to relieve the castle." Sir Roderick, who had greeted Isabella's arrival in camp with genuine pleasure the day before, pointed to a position on the map. "Our scouts report that Edivane's main force is camped here, in the valley beyond Hawk's Ridge. They outnumber us, but the terrain works to our advantage if we can draw them into the narrower passes." "And if they don't take the bait?" asked another officer, a grizzled veteran named Sir Percival. "They've been frustratingly cautious so far." "Then we must provide more tempting bait," Alaric replied, his finger tracing a route across the map. "I propose we make it appear that we're withdrawing, retreating toward Dorneval. Edivane will be eager to press what he perceives as an advantage. When his forces are committed to the pursuit, we spring our trap here at Widow's Gorge." The officers leaned in, studying the location. A narrow defile between steep hillsides, perfect for an ambush but also risky. If the trap failed, if they were the ones surrounded instead. "It's bold," Sir Roderick admitted, "but it could work, especially now that we know to guard our plans more carefully." Lord Harwick frowned. "It commits our entire force, Your Majesty. If we fail..." "If we fail, Dorneval falls regardless," Alaric cut him off. "We no longer have the luxury of caution, my lord. The time has come to risk everything on one decisive stroke." The council continued for another hour, refining the details of the plan. Isabella listened silently, impressed by Alaric's strategic mind and the respect his officers clearly held for him, despite his relative youth compared to veterans like Sir Percival. As the meeting concluded and the officers filed out to prepare their men, Alaric held Isabella back with a gentle touch on her arm. "What do you think?" he asked when they were alone. She blinked in surprise. "You're asking for my opinion on military matters?" "I'm asking for your honest assessment from fresh eyes. Sometimes those closest to a problem cannot see its solution, or its flaws." Isabella considered the map still spread on the table. "It seems desperate," she said finally. "But I understand why. Lady Elspeth will hold the castle as long as humanly possible, but without relief." "Exactly." Alaric's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "This war must end quickly, one way or another." "One way," she corrected firmly. "Victory is the only acceptable outcome." A smile touched his lips. "Who would have thought the stable mistress would prove to be my most determined general?" "Not a general. Just someone with everything to lose." She squeezed his hand. "Promise me you'll be careful. This trap you're setting, you won't place yourself in unnecessary danger. I'll lead from the front as a king must, but I have no intention of dying in this conflict, Isabella." His eyes held hers, intense and sincere. "I have too much to live for." The day passed in a flurry of preparations. The camp buzzed with activity as orders were distributed, weapons checked, horses prepared. The plan would be set in motion the following morning, a feigned retreat designed to draw Edivaine's forces into a trap. Isabella found herself unexpectedly useful, her expertise with horses allowing her to assist in assessing which mounts were best suited for the difficult terrain they would face. The men who had initially viewed her with suspicion began to treat her with grudging respect as she worked alongside them. As dusk fell, an unexpected commotion arose near the perimeter of the camp. Isabella was helping to organize supplies for the morning's march when Walter appeared at her side, expression grim. "Mistress Morgan, you're needed at the command tent, immediately." "What's happened?" she asked, setting aside the saddle she had been inspecting. "A prisoner has been brought in, someone who's been asking for you by name." With a sense of foreboding, Isabella followed her guard through the twilight camp. At the command pavilion, a crowd had gathered. Officers, soldiers, all wearing expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Inside, she found Alaric standing over a kneeling figure, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. When the prisoner raised his head, Isabella gasped. It was Morven Fletcher. The traitor's face was bruised and bloodied, his fine steward's clothes torn and filthy. His hands were bound behind his back, and 2 guards stood ready at his sides. But his eyes, when they found Isabella, still held that same calculating intelligence that had always made her uneasy. "Ah, the king's whore," he said, his voice hoarse but the venom in it unmistakable. "Still alive, I see. How disappointing." One of the guards cuffed him hard across the face. "Show respect in the presence of His Majesty." Alaric held up a hand. "Enough. He'll face justice soon enough." His eyes met Isabella's. "He was captured trying to infiltrate our lines. Claims he has information he'll share only with you." "With me?" Isabella approached cautiously, staying just out of Morven's reach despite his bonds. "Why?" "Because, my dear Isabella," Morven said, smiling through bloodied lips, "I thought you might like to know what King Rowan has planned for your lover here, and for you." "Whatever game you're playing, Fletcher, it won't save you from the hangman," Alaric said coldly. "Oh, I expect to hang, or worse." Morven's smile widened, revealing blood-stained teeth. "But I'll die knowing I've done my part to destroy you both." Isabella studied him carefully. Something wasn't right. Morven was too confident, too pleased with himself for a man facing execution for treason. "What are you really doing here?" she asked. "You could have fled anywhere after leaving Dornival. Why come here, where you knew you'd be captured?" "Clever girl. Always were, weren't you? Too clever for a stable mistress." His gaze shifted to Alaric. "That's why he loves you, you know. Not for your beauty, though you're comely enough, but because you see what others miss." "Enough riddles," Alaric snapped. "What information do you claim to have?" Morven's eyes never left Isabella's. King Rowan knows of your plan. The feigned retreat, the ambush at Widow's Gorge. Even now, his forces prepare their own trap for you. A cold silence fell over the pavilion. If what Morven said was true, the entire strategy they had spent the day preparing was compromised before it had even begun. How could he know? Sir Roderick demanded. We only finalized the plan today, and no one has left the camp. Ask her. Morven jerked his head toward Isabella. Ask your precious stable mistress what she really did during those hours she spent helping with the horses today. What? Isabella gasped. You can't possibly think I think nothing, Morven interrupted. But consider, your majesty. She appears mysteriously in camp with a tale of my betrayal, distracting you from the possibility that the real traitor might be much closer to your heart. Alaric's expression was thunderous. You dare accuse her, after you yourself confessed to being Edavane's spy? Did I? Or is that merely what she claims? Morven's voice had taken on a silky, persuasive quality. Has anyone else heard my confession? The guardsman who supposedly chased me from the castle? The captain who accompanied her here? Where is he now, I wonder? Isabella felt as though the ground were shifting beneath her feet. Captain Thorne is recovering from his wounds, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. And the guards who pursued you can confirm everything I've said. Can they? Or will they say whatever Lady Elspeth has instructed them to say? Morven turned his gaze back to Alaric. You've been played for a fool, your majesty. The woman you love is Edavane's creature, sent to bewilder your senses and betray your plans. For a terrible moment, Isabella saw doubt flicker in the eyes of the officers surrounding them. Even Sir Roderick, who had been friendly to her, now regarded her with uncertainty. But Alaric's expression never wavered. You waste your breath, Fletcher. I know Isabella's heart as I know my own. Your attempts to sow discord will fail. Will they? Morven smiled again, that same unsettling, confident smile. Then why did I allow myself to be captured? Why am I here at all, if not to witness the fruit of our labors? Our labors? Isabella repeated, a horrible suspicion forming in her mind. You mean? Before she could finish, a sentry burst into the pavilion. Your Majesty! Riders approaching from the north! A large force flying Edavane's banner! The officers rushed outside, Alaric at their head, leaving Isabella with the bound traitor and his guards. Right on time, Morven said softly, almost to himself. It's a pity, really. You seem a decent enough woman, for all that you've attached yourself to a doomed king. Isabella knelt before him, bringing her face level with his. Whatever you're planning, whatever you've done, it won't succeed. Alaric is twice the man, twice the king that Rowan of Edavane could ever be. Perhaps, but Rowan has twice the army and knows exactly where to strike. Morven leaned forward, lowering his voice further. He knows that the way to destroy a king is not through his crown, but through his heart. A chill ran down Isabella's spine at his words. Before she could respond, Alaric returned, his face grim. It's a probing force, not the main army, he reported, testing our defenses most likely. Or a diversion, Isabella said, rising to her feet. Your Majesty, I think... The rest of her words were lost in a tremendous explosion that rocked the entire camp. The ground shook, tent poles swayed, and outside, men began shouting in panic and confusion. What in God's name? Alaric began, then his eyes widened in realization. The supply wagons, the black powder. Another explosion followed, closer this time. In the chaos, Morven began to laugh, a high, wild sound that cut through the din of shouting and the crackling of flames that had begun to spread through the camp. You see, he cried. You see how thoroughly you've been defeated. Your trap is sprung upon you instead. Alaric drew his sword. Secure the prisoner, he ordered the guards. Then get him to the rear of the camp. I want him alive to stand trial when this is over. As the guards hauled Morven to his feet, the traitor called out one last taunt. You'll never see your precious Dornival again, your Majesty. And when you fall, your whore will follow. Alaric turned to Isabella, his expression torn between duty to his men and fear for her safety. Go with the guards. Stay with Fletcher. Whatever happens, he must not escape, and you must remain safe. I won't leave you, she protested, gripping his arm. You must. His voice softened even as another explosion rocked the camp. Isabella, please. I cannot fight effectively if I'm worried about you. Understanding the truth of his words, she nodded reluctantly. Be careful, she whispered. Remember what you have to live for. Always. He pulled her close for one brief, fierce kiss, then released her. Now go. As Isabella followed the guards dragging Morven toward the rear of the camp, the night erupted into chaos around them. Men rushed to defend the perimeter while others fought to contain the fires spreading from the exploded supply wagons. Through it all, Morven continued to laugh, the sound haunting in its triumph. You see, Mistress Morgan, he called over his shoulder. This is what becomes of those who reach above their station. This is the price of loving a king. Isabella said nothing, focusing instead on keeping pace with the guards as they made their way through the panicked camp. But in her heart, fear bloomed like a poisonous flower. Not fear for herself, but for Alaric, for the man she loved, now fighting for his life and kingdom against an enemy who seemed to have anticipated their every move. An enemy who had made it clear that the king's heart, his love for her, was the true target of their attack. The night blazed with unnatural light as fires spread through the camp, turning darkness to a hellish orange glow. Isabella followed the guards as they dragged Morven toward a small stone structure at the rear of the encampment, a shepherd's hut that had been repurposed as a secure holding area. Behind them, the sounds of battle intensified, the clash of steel, the screams of wounded men, the continuing explosions as more supply wagons ignited. The acrid smell of black powder and burning canvas filled the air, making breathing difficult. In here, the older guard, Walter, ordered, shoving Morven roughly through the doorway of the hut. Inside was sparse, a small table, a single stool, a pallet in the corner. A tiny window, too small for a man to squeeze through, provided the only natural light. One of us should return to the battle, the younger guard, Godfrey, said, his hand hovering anxiously over the hilt of his sword. They'll need every blade. Walter hesitated, glancing between Morven, who had been pushed to his knees in the center of the room, and Isabella, who stood near the doorway. The king ordered us both to stay with the prisoner and Mistress Morgan, he reminded his companion. The king may be fighting for his life out there, Godfrey protested. Isabella made a quick decision. Go, Godfrey, she said. Walter can guard us both. The king needs you more than we do. The young guard looked relieved. Thank you, mistress. I'll return when I can. He hurried out, hand already drawing his sword as he ran toward the sounds of fighting. Walter secured the door behind him, then turned to face Morven with undisguised contempt. Comfortable, traitor? Morven, still on his knees, with hands bound behind his back, managed to maintain his air of smug superiority despite his position. Quite. I have the best view of Dornival's downfall right here. Silence. Walter cuffed him across the face. One more word and I'll gag you as well as bind you. Isabella moved to the small window, straining to see what was happening at the main camp. From this distance, it was a scene from a nightmare. Tents ablaze, men fighting in silhouette against the flames, the occasional flash of another explosion. Her heart ached thinking of Alaric in the midst of that chaos. He'll die out there, you know. She turned to find Morven watching her, his eyes reflecting the distant firelight. I told you to be silent, Walter growled, raising his hand for another blow. Wait, Isabella said, moving closer to the prisoner. Let him speak. Walter lowered his hand reluctantly. As you wish, mistress, but don't believe a word this snake says. Isabella crouched before Morven, bringing herself to eye level with him. Why are you so certain the king will fall? Edevain's forces may have surprised us, but Alaric is a skilled commander with loyal men. Loyalty. Morven spat the word like a curse. What good is loyalty against superior numbers, superior intelligence, and a trap years in the making? Years? Isabella's brow furrowed. What do you mean, years? A slow smile spread across Morven's face. Do you think this began with your little romance? With the rejected treaty? No, Mistress Morgan. King Rowan has been planning Dornival's fall since before Alaric took the throne. And you've been helping him all that time, she said, pieces falling into place. That's why you were so bitter about your position. You believed Edivane would reward you once Dornoval fell. Not believed. Knew. Morven's eyes gleamed with fanatical certainty. King Rowan recognizes talent and ambition. He promised me lands, title, wealth, everything your precious Alaric and his father before him denied me despite years of faithful service. Walter snorted in disgust. Faithful? You betrayed your king, your kingdom, your very people. My people? Morven laughed bitterly. The nobles who treated me like dirt beneath their boots. The servants who were promoted above me because they flattered better. The king who never once noticed my capabilities. He shook his head. No, the only betrayal was Dornoval's betrayal of me. Isabella studied him with a mixture of pity and revulsion. So you sold information to Edivane. Battle plans, castle defenses. Everything, Morven confirmed, a note of pride in his voice. For years I memorized every document that crossed my desk, noted every whispered conversation, mapped every weakness in Dornoval's armor, literal and figurative. Including me, Isabella said softly. You saw the king's feelings for me as another weakness to exploit. Oh, you were an unexpected gift. Morven's smile widened. Imagine my delight when I discovered the mighty King Alaric mooning over a stable mistress like some lovesick squire. When I told King Rowan, he could scarcely believe his good fortune. Walter shifted uncomfortably. Mistress, perhaps we shouldn't indulge his ramblings. No, Isabella said firmly, never taking her eyes from Morven's face. I want to hear exactly what he did, how he betrayed us all. It was almost too easy, Morven continued, clearly relishing the chance to boast. I watched you in the gardens. I reported every meeting, every touch, every besotted glance. And when Alaric rejected the treaty, rejected Princess Eleonora, he laughed again. King Rowan was furious, yes, but also delighted. What better way to destroy a kingdom than through its king's inappropriate affections? Isabella fought to keep her expression neutral, despite the pain his words caused. And the attack on me in the stables? Was that your idea or Edivane's? Mine, he admitted. I thought killing you would destabilize Alaric completely, make him reckless, vulnerable, but you proved more resourceful than I anticipated. His eyes narrowed. No matter. The end result will be the same. Which is, she prompted, though she dreaded the answer. Dornoval falls. Alaric dies. And you? He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a whisper. You, my dear, will be delivered to Princess Eleonora as a gift. I understand she has quite creative ideas about how to repay the woman who cost her a crown. Isabella couldn't suppress a shudder at the malice in his tone. She rose to her feet, turning away to hide the fear that momentarily overcame her composure. Walter moved to stand beside her. Don't listen to him, mistress. King Alaric will prevail. I've seen him overcome worse odds. Have you? Morven called from behind them. When? In what battle has he faced such complete betrayal, such overwhelming force, such personal stakes? Before Walter could respond, a loud crash from outside drew their attention. The door of the hut burst open, revealing 3 armed men in Edivane's colors. Walter reached for his sword, but too late. A crossbow bolt struck him in the chest, sending him staggering backward into Isabella's arms. Walter! She cried, lowering him gently to the floor as blood spread across his tunic. Run! The guard gasped, his eyes already glazing with approaching death. Run, mistress! But there was nowhere to run. The Edivane soldiers blocked the only exit, their weapons trained on her. Behind them, more enemy soldiers poured into the rear of the camp, overwhelming the minimal defenses left there. Well done, gentlemen, Morven said pleasantly. Your timing is impeccable. One of the soldiers stepped forward to cut his bonds. King Rowan sends his regards, Master Fletcher, and his thanks for your service. Morven rubbed his wrists where the ropes had chafed, then gestured toward Isabella. And as promised, I deliver the king's whore, unharmed as instructed. The lead soldier looked Isabella up and down with cold appraisal. This is the woman, the stable mistress who turned the king's head? The very same, Morven confirmed, though I confess I still don't see the appeal myself. Isabella backed away until she hit the wall of the hut, her mind racing. Walter lay dead at her feet. Outside, the battle continued, but from the sounds it was moving farther away. Alaric's forces being pushed back, perhaps driven from the camp entirely. "King Rowan wants her alive and relatively intact," the soldier said, his tone making it clear that relatively left considerable room for interpretation. "Bring her, and you too, Fletcher. The king wishes to reward you personally." Two soldiers seized Isabella's arms, dragging her roughly from the hut. Outside, the devastation was complete. The rear of the camp had been overrun, tents smoldering or collapsed, bodies scattered on the trampled ground. In the distance, she could see the main battle still raging, a chaotic swirl of men and horses illuminated by the burning remnants of the camp. "Alaric," she whispered, straining to catch any glimpse of the royal standard, any sign that he still fought, still lived. "Your king cannot save you now, mistress," Morven said, falling into step beside her as they were marched away from the camp. "Best accept your fate." Isabella turned to him, a strange calm settling over her despite the dire circumstances. "You've made one critical mistake, Morven." "Oh?" He raised an eyebrow, amused by her defiance. "And what might that be?" "You think Alaric loves me because I'm beautiful or clever. You think it's a weakness, something to exploit." She straightened her shoulders despite the painful grip of the soldiers. "But our love is strength, not weakness, and strength cannot be broken by the likes of you." Morven's smug expression faltered slightly. "Pretty words. Let's see if you still believe them when you're kneeling before King Rowan and his daughter." They were led to a small clearing where horses waited, held by more Edivane soldiers. Isabella was roughly lifted onto one, her hands bound to the saddle. Morven mounted another, grimacing as his body protested the movement after his harsh treatment. "To the main camp," the lead soldier ordered. "King Rowan will want his prize without delay." As they rode away from the battlefield, Isabella twisted in the saddle for one last look at the camp where she had reunited with Alaric just days before. Flames still leapt toward the night sky, and the sounds of combat had diminished to scattered clashes, the desperate resistance of men who knew they were defeated but refused to surrender. Had Alaric escaped? Was he among the wounded, the captured, or the dead? The uncertainty was a physical pain in her chest, sharper than any fear for her own fate. The Edivane camp, when they reached it after an hour's ride, was a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind. Orderly rows of tents, soldiers moving with disciplined purpose, the confidence of men on the winning side of a conflict. At the center stood a large pavilion flying Edivane's banner, a black wolf on a crimson field. Isabella was pulled from her horse and marched toward the pavilion, Morven following close behind, his earlier swagger now tempered by a nervous anticipation. The soldiers guarding the entrance stepped aside at their approach, and Isabella found herself thrust into the presence of King Rowan of Edivane. He was older than she had expected, perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His face might have been handsome once, but years of ambition and calculation had hardened it into something predatory. Beside him stood a young woman whose beauty was marred only by the cold hatred in her eyes, Princess Eleonora, the rejected bride. "Your Majesty," the lead soldier announced with a bow. "As ordered, we have brought the woman and Fletcher." King Rowan studied Isabella with the dispassionate interest of a man examining a curious specimen. "So this is she," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "The stable mistress who cost my daughter a crown." Isabella met his gaze without flinching, though her heart pounded painfully in her chest. "Your daughter never had a claim to Dornival's throne, Your Majesty. The treaty was a sham, as you well know." A flicker of surprise crossed Rowan's face, quickly replaced by amusement. "She has spirit, I'll grant her that." He turned to Morven. "You've done well, Fletcher. The information you provided has proven most valuable." Morven bowed deeply. "I live to serve, Your Majesty, and I trust you'll remember your promises once Dornival is yours." "Of course." Rowan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I always reward loyalty appropriately." Princess Eleonora stepped forward, circling Isabella like a predator. "I expected someone more impressive," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. What could Alaric possibly have seen in such a plain creature? Isabella said nothing, knowing any response would only feed the princess's spite. Perhaps it was the novelty, Eleonora continued, reaching out to lift a strand of Isabella's hair. A king can have any noble woman he desires, but a dirty stable mistress? How unusual. I believe, Rowan interjected, it had more to do with her apparent character than her station. Our sources suggest King Alaric valued her honesty, her compassion. His gaze shifted to Morven, qualities sadly lacking in many who serve the crown. Morven shifted uncomfortably. Your Majesty, may I inquire about the battle? Has King Alaric been captured? Killed? Neither, unfortunately, Rowan replied, his tone suggesting this was a minor inconvenience rather than a significant setback. He managed to rally a portion of his forces and retreat into the hills. My generals pursue him now. Relief flooded through Isabella at this news. Alaric was alive, still fighting. There was still hope. Rowan must have read the emotion on her face. Don't celebrate too quickly, my dear. His situation is hopeless. Cut off from supplies, outnumbered, with Dorneval itself under siege from my other forces. It's merely a matter of time. You underestimate him, Isabella said quietly. And you underestimate Dorneval. Do I? Rowan looked amused again. Perhaps, but I have something he wants. He reached out to grip Isabella's chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. Something he loves, and that gives me the advantage, wouldn't you agree? Before she could answer, a commotion arose outside the pavilion. A messenger burst in, his face flushed with exertion. Your Majesty, urgent news from the Eastern Force. Rowan released Isabella, turning to the messenger with a frown. Speak. The siege of Dorneval, sire. It's not proceeding as planned. The messenger swallowed hard. The Dowager Countess has organized a formidable defense. Our first assault was repelled with heavy losses. Morven stepped forward, his expression alarmed. That's impossible. I provided detailed information about the castle's weaknesses, the exact composition of the remaining garrison. It appears, the messenger continued, that the Dowager had anticipated such betrayal. The defenses were significantly altered after Fletcher's departure. Rowan's face darkened with anger. Lady Elspeth, always the thorn in my side. He turned to Morven, whose smug confidence had evaporated entirely. It seems your intelligence may not be as valuable as you claimed, Fletcher. Your Majesty, I assure you. Silence. Rowan cut him off with a gesture. We will discuss your reward later. The king turned back to Isabella, his previous amusement replaced by cold calculation. It appears Dorneval's resistance is more determined than expected. But no matter. With you as my hostage, King Alaric will have no choice but to surrender, both himself and his kingdom. Isabella met his gaze steadily. You don't know him as I do. No? Rowan's smile returned, colder than before. We shall see. Take her to the secure tent and post a double guard. Fletcher, you will remain here. We have much to discuss regarding the accuracy of your information. As Isabella was led away, she caught a glimpse of Morven's face, the fear beginning to dawn as he realized his position might not be as secure as he had believed. The traitor was learning the hard lesson that those who betray once can never be fully trusted again. Outside, in the cool night air, Isabella lifted her face to the stars visible above the camp. Somewhere out there, Alaric was still fighting. Dorneval still stood defiant. And she, despite her captivity, refused to surrender to despair. For the first time since her capture, she felt a flicker of hope. Not just for herself, but for the kingdom she had come to love as deeply as its king. 3 days passed in captivity, each hour an exercise in patience and endurance for Isabella. The secure tent was little more than a canvas prison. A cot, a small table, a basin of water changed daily. Guards stood at constant attention outside, rotating every few hours but never leaving their post. Through the thin walls, she could hear the bustling activity of the Edivane camp, soldiers drilling, messengers coming and going. the distant sounds of conflict as skirmishes continued in the surrounding hills. On the morning of the fourth day, Princess Eleonora entered unannounced, accompanied by 2 female attendants. Her golden hair was elaborately styled, her gown of crimson silk a stark contrast to Isabella's simple, now soiled riding dress. "Leave us," the princess commanded the guards, who bowed and stepped outside. To her attendants she added, "Wait there. I wish to speak with the prisoner alone." Isabella rose from her cot, determined to meet this confrontation on her feet. She had spent her captivity thus far in silent defiance, refusing to show fear before her captors. She would not break that pattern now. "You look dreadful," Eleonora observed, circling Isabella with the same predatory grace she had displayed in her father's pavilion. "Though I suppose one can't expect much from a woman who sleeps with horses." "I care for horses, Your Highness," Isabella corrected mildly. "I sleep in my own quarters, or did, before your father's war disrupted so many lives." Eleonora's perfect features tightened with annoyance. "Do not presume to lecture me on the consequences of war, stable mistress. It is your king, your lover, who brought this conflict upon his people by rejecting a beneficial alliance." "Beneficial to whom?" Isabella asked. "To Edivane, certainly, to King Rowan's ambitions. But to Dorneval? I think not." The princess's hand struck like a viper, the slap echoing in the confined space of the tent. Isabella's head snapped to the side, but she refused to raise a hand to her stinging cheek, refused to give Eleonora the satisfaction of seeing her react. "You forget yourself," Eleonora hissed. "You are a prisoner, a hostage, a pawn in a game played by your betters. Your only value lies in Alaric's inexplicable affection for you." Isabella met the princess's gaze steadily. "If that is so, why are you here, Your Highness? Surely taunting a mere pawn is beneath your royal dignity." Eleonora's eyes narrowed, but a cold smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Curiosity, perhaps. I wished to see for myself what manner of woman could entice a king to throw away a kingdom." "He did not throw away his kingdom. He refused to surrender it to your father's machinations. And yet, here we are." Eleonora gestured expansively. "Dorneval under siege, Alaric's army scattered, and you, his precious love, in our hands." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "My father believes you are the key to Alaric's surrender, that he will lay down his crown to save your miserable life." Isabella held her ground, refusing to be intimidated despite the princess's proximity. "Then your father does not understand Alaric as well as he believes. A true king places his kingdom above all else, even his heart." Something flickered in Eleonora's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant respect. "You would have him sacrifice you? How very noble." "I would have him do his duty, as I will do mine." "And what duty is that? To die with dignity when he refuses to surrender?" The princess laughed, a brittle sound devoid of humor. "A romantic notion, but I doubt your resolve will hold when the time comes." Isabella said nothing, knowing any response would only feed Eleonora's spite. The princess studied her for a long moment, as if trying to decipher the puzzle of the stable mistress who had won a king's heart. "You know," Eleonora said finally, her tone conversational, almost friendly, "I was prepared to hate you from the moment I learned of your existence. The woman who cost me a crown, a kingdom, a destiny. I imagined you as some enchantress, some irresistible beauty who had bewitched Alaric with feminine wiles." She circled Isabella again, her silken skirts whispering against the tent's rough canvas floor. "Instead, I find this, a plain woman with calloused hands and a stubborn chin. No great beauty, no obvious charm." She stopped before Isabella, head tilted in contemplation. "It is most vexing." "I'm sorry to disappoint your highness," Isabella replied, unable to keep a hint of dry humor from her voice. Unexpectedly, Eleonora laughed, a genuine sound this time, startling in its normalcy. "Oh, I begin to see it now, that quiet defiance, that refusal to be cowed." Her expression hardened again. "It will not save you, however, or him." Before Isabella could respond, the tent flap opened, and one of the guards appeared, bowing deeply. "Your Highness, the king requests your presence immediately. There has been a development." Eleonora straightened, all traces of momentary humanity vanishing behind her royal mask. "Very well, I shall come at once." To Isabella, she added, "Our conversation is not finished, stable mistress. I find myself unexpectedly intrigued by you." After the princess departed, Isabella sank onto her cot, finally allowing herself to touch her throbbing cheek. Eleonora's visit had been strange, part interrogation, part assessment, part something almost like genuine curiosity. What had she hoped to learn? What development had called her away? Hours passed with no answers, only the usual sounds of the camp and the changing of the guards. When night fell, a servant brought her the same meager meal she had received each day of her captivity: a hunk of bread, a piece of cheese, a cup of watered wine. She was just finishing this sparse repast when the tent flap opened again, this time admitting King Rowan himself. Isabella rose immediately, wary of this unexpected visit. "Sit," Rowan commanded, gesturing to the cot. "There's no need for formalities between us at this point." Isabella remained standing. "With respect, Your Majesty, I prefer to stand in your presence." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "As you wish." He clasped his hands behind his back, studying her with that same dispassionate interest she had noted during their first meeting. "My daughter tells me you were not what she expected." "So she informed me, Your Majesty." "She also reports that you believe King Alaric will not surrender, even to save your life." Rowan's gaze was penetrating, as if trying to see through her to the truth beneath. "Is that accurate?" Isabella chose her words carefully. "I believe King Alaric will do what is best for Dornoval, whatever that may be." A diplomatic answer. Rowan began to pace the small confines of the tent, but unfortunately, not a helpful one for your situation. "My situation is what it is, Your Majesty. I have no illusions about my fate should Alaric refuse your terms." Rowan stopped his pacing, turning to face her directly. "And that doesn't frighten you? The prospect of death, or worse, for a king who will not save you?" "Of course it frightens me," Isabella admitted, seeing no point in false bravado. "I am not a soldier or a martyr. I am a woman who wishes to live, but fear does not dictate my choices, nor should it dictate Alaric's." "Remarkable," Rowan murmured, almost to himself. "In all my years of conquest and negotiation, I have rarely encountered such steadfastness in one of your station." His eyes narrowed. "Unless, of course, it is merely a performance, a calculated show of bravery to impress your captors." Isabella met his gaze directly. "What would be the point of such a performance, Your Majesty? My fate is sealed regardless of how I conduct myself in captivity." "Perhaps, perhaps not." Rowan moved to the small table, trailing his fingers along its rough surface. "There are developments you should be aware of, Mistress Morgan, developments that may change your perspective." A chill ran down Isabella's spine at his tone. "What developments, Your Majesty?" "First, you should know that Dornoval continues to resist my eastern force, though they cannot hold indefinitely. Lady Elspeth has proven more formidable than anticipated, but she lacks the manpower to withstand a prolonged siege." Relief flooded through Isabella at this news. Dornoval still stood. Lady Elspeth still fought. "Second," Rowan continued, "King Alaric's remaining forces have been engaged in guerrilla tactics against my troops, striking from the hills, then disappearing before we can mount a proper response. Effective in the short term, but ultimately futile." "And third?" Isabella prompted, sensing the king was building to something more significant. Rowan's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Third, and most importantly, we have captured a prize even more valuable than you, Mistress Morgan. A prize that ensures Alaric will have no choice but to surrender, regardless of his feelings toward his kingdom or his stable mistress." Cold dread settled in Isabella's stomach. "What prize? Who, not what?" Rowan smiled, a predator's smile. "This evening my scouts intercepted a small party attempting to break through our lines, a party led by none other than Lady Elspeth herself." Isabella couldn't suppress a gasp. "Lady Elspeth? But she was defending the castle." Apparently, she left that task to her subordinates and attempted to reach her nephew with vital intelligence. A brave but foolish decision. Rowan's satisfaction was palpable. Now I hold both the king's lover and his beloved aunt, his heart and his family. What do you think he will do now, Mistress Morgan? Isabella's mind raced. Lady Elspeth captured. It was a devastating blow, both strategically and personally. The Dowager Countess had been Alaric's closest advisor, his surrogate mother since his own parents' deaths. He loved her deeply, respected her wisdom, relied on her counsel. "May I see her?" Isabella asked, knowing the request was bold but unable to stop herself. "To assure myself of her well-being?" "In time, perhaps," Rowan replied, moving toward the tent flap. "For now, I suggest you reflect on your changed circumstances. Tomorrow, a messenger will ride to Alaric's hiding place under flag of truce, bearing my terms. His immediate surrender in exchange for the lives of both you and Lady Elspeth." He paused at the entrance, looking back at her with cold calculation. "If you truly love him, Mistress Morgan, you might consider encouraging his surrender when the time comes. It would spare much bloodshed, including your own." After the king departed, Isabella paced the confines of her tent, mind churning with this new information. Lady Elspeth captured. It changed everything. Alaric might indeed sacrifice Isabella for the good of the kingdom, but his aunt, the last of his family, the woman who had raised him after his parents' deaths, the political and emotional price would be too high. Hours passed as she wrestled with these thoughts. Outside, the camp gradually quieted as soldiers sought their rest. The guards changed once more, their voices a low murmur as they exchanged information about their watch. It was well past midnight when Isabella heard a strange sound, a soft scratching at the rear of her tent, barely audible even in the night's silence. She froze, listening intently. There it was again, deliberate, not the random noise of wind or animal. Moving silently, she approached the back wall of the tent. The scratching stopped, replaced by the faintest whisper. "Mistress Morgan, are you there?" The voice was unfamiliar, but the fact that someone knew her name and was attempting secret communication could only mean one thing. Alaric's people had infiltrated the camp. "I'm here," she whispered back, crouching low by the canvas. "Who are you?" "A friend, sent by the king." The voice was barely audible. "Stand back from the wall." Isabella retreated a step. A moment later, the tip of a dagger pierced the canvas, cutting a small slit that was quickly widened into an opening, just large enough for a person to squeeze through. A figure dressed in the dark colors of Edivaine's forces slipped inside, a young man with a weather-beaten face and alert eyes that scanned the tent quickly before returning to Isabella. "Mistress Morgan," he said with a slight bow. "I am Sir Thomas of Blackwood, in service to King Alaric. I've come to get you out of here." "Sir Thomas," Isabella breathed, hope and fear warring within her. "How did you find me? How did you get into the camp?" "We've had scouts watching since your capture," he explained in a hurried whisper. "As for getting in, Edivaine's army has grown so large they can't possibly know every face. A uniform and confident demeanor go a long way." He moved back to the opening he'd created. "We must go now, while the guards are distracted by my companions on the far side of the camp." Isabella hesitated. "Wait, have you heard? They've captured Lady Elspeth as well." Sir Thomas's expression grew grim. "Yes, she's being held in the king's own pavilion, too heavily guarded for us to reach tonight. But the king has ordered me to get you out first, while there's a chance." "I can't leave without her," Isabella protested. "If I escape, they might harm her in retaliation." "Mistress, please." The knight's voice was urgent. "The king was most explicit. You are to be rescued at all costs. We will return for Lady Elspeth with a larger force, but for now we must get you to safety." Isabella closed her eyes briefly, torn between the desperate desire for freedom and her loyalty to the woman who had helped her, protected her, risked everything to support her relationship with Alaric. "Very well," she said finally, opening her eyes with renewed determination. "But you must promise me we will return for her. Soon." "You have my word," Sir Thomas assured her. "Now, quickly, Take this. He handed her a dark cloak. Keep your head down and follow me closely. If we're challenged, let me do the talking. Isabella pulled the cloak around her shoulders, drawing the hood up to shadow her face. With one last glance at the tent that had been her prison, she ducked through the opening into the cool night air of freedom. Sir Thomas led her through the sleeping camp with quiet confidence, moving as if they had every right to be there. Twice they passed other soldiers on watch, but each time, Sir Thomas exchanged brief nods or quiet passwords that allowed them to pass unchallenged. At the perimeter of the camp, they slipped past a drowsy sentry and into the sheltering darkness of the surrounding forest. Only when they were well beyond the reach of Edavane's patrols did Sir Thomas allow them to stop and catch their breath. "We have horses waiting a quarter-mile ahead," he told her, his voice still low despite the distance they'd put between themselves and the camp. "From there, it's a hard ride to the king's position in the western hills." "Alaric as well?" Isabella asked, the question that had burned in her heart throughout her captivity, finally finding voice. "Truly?" Sir Thomas smiled for the first time. "He as well, mistress, determined, focused, and leading our resistance with a strategic brilliance that has Edavane's generals tearing their beards in frustration." His expression sobered. "But he has been half mad with worry for you. Your safe return will restore his spirit immeasurably." They reached the waiting horses, sturdy mountain ponies similar to the one Isabella had ridden on her journey to find Alaric what seemed a lifetime ago. Sir Thomas helped her mount, then swung into his own saddle. "Stay close," he instructed. "The path is treacherous in darkness, but we dare not wait for dawn." As they rode into the night, leaving Edavane's camp behind, Isabella felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief at her escape, joy at the prospect of reuniting with Alaric, anxiety for Lady Elspeth's safety, and beneath it all, a growing determination. This war had become personal in ways she had never imagined possible. No longer was she merely a stable mistress caught up in events beyond her control. She was a woman fighting for the man she loved, for the kingdom that had become her home, for a future that seemed both impossible and inevitable. And somewhere ahead in the darkness, Alaric waited, a king battling against overwhelming odds, a man whose love had changed the course of nations, and the other half of a story that was far from its conclusion. Dawn broke over the western hills in a wash of pale gold, illuminating a landscape transformed by war. What had once been peaceful woodland was now dotted with small encampments, sentry posts, and the occasional glint of armor as Dorneval's remaining forces maintained their vigilant watch over the valleys below. Isabella, exhausted from the night's hard ride but buoyed by the promise of reunion, followed Sir Thomas along a narrow path that wound through dense pine forest. The air was crisp and clean here, so different from the smoke-filled atmosphere of Edavane's camp. "Just ahead," Sir Thomas said, pointing to where the path curved around a massive outcropping of rock. "The king's headquarters is sheltered in the valley beyond. We've used natural features to conceal our position from Edavane's scouts." As they rounded the bend, Isabella caught her breath. Below them lay a small, protected valley, its entrance nearly invisible from any other approach. Tents and makeshift shelters clustered around a central clearing where men moved with purpose despite the early hour. A stream cut through the center, providing fresh water, while the steep walls of the surrounding hills offered both protection and vantage points for sentries. "It's perfect," she murmured, understanding at once why Edavane's forces had been unable to locate them. Sir Thomas smiled with quiet pride. The king found it himself. He recalled hunting in these hills as a boy, and remembered this place, known only to the royal family and their most trusted guides. They descended into the valley, drawing curious glances from soldiers who recognized Sir Thomas but wondered at his companion, her face still partially concealed by the hood of her borrowed cloak. Word of their arrival spread quickly through the camp. By the time they reached the central clearing, a crowd had begun to gather. A tall figure emerged from the largest tent, and Isabella's heart leapt into her throat. Alaric. He looked different, thinner, his face more angular, a new scar visible along his jawline. He wore simple armor rather than royal regalia, and several days' growth of beard darkened his face. But his eyes, those were unchanged, and they fixed on her with such intensity that she felt it like a physical touch. For a moment, Neither moved. The entire camp seemed to hold its breath, witnessing this reunion between their king and the woman he loved. Then Isabella pushed back her hood, revealing her face to him fully, and something broke in Alaric's carefully maintained composure. He crossed the distance between them in long strides as she slid from her horse. They collided in an embrace that spoke more eloquently than words. The desperate relief, the joy of reunion, the shared pain of separation. "Isabella," he breathed against her hair, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "My God, you're alive. You're here." She clung to him, feeling the solid reality of him beneath her hands. His heartbeat, his warmth, his strength. "Alaric," she whispered, using his name without title or hesitation. "I thought I might never see you again." He pulled back just enough to look into her face, his hands coming up to frame her cheeks. His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. "Nothing could have kept me from finding you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Nothing." Then he was kissing her. Not the gentle, careful kisses they had shared in the garden, or even the desperate farewell before battle, but something deeper, rawer, a claiming and a promise all at once. Isabella responded with equal fervor, heedless of the soldiers watching, caring only that they were together again against all odds. When they finally parted, both breathless, Alaric seemed to become aware of their audience. But instead of pulling away, he kept one arm firmly around Isabella's waist as he turned to face his men. "My friends," he called, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Many of you know Mistress Morgan. Some of you may have wondered why your king would risk so much for a stable mistress." His arm tightened around her. "Now you see the answer before you. This woman risked everything to bring us warning of Morven Fletcher's treachery. She endured capture by our enemies rather than betray our cause. And her courage, her loyalty, her love are what we fight for. Not just for Dorneval as an idea, but for the people who make our kingdom worth defending." A cheer went up from the gathered soldiers, not the polite acknowledgement of courtiers, but the genuine response of men who recognized true valor, regardless of its source. Isabella felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. "Come," Alaric said more quietly, guiding her toward his tent. "You must be exhausted, and we have much to discuss." Inside the command tent, the trappings of royalty had been reduced to their essence: a simple camp bed, a table covered with maps and reports, a few chairs for his officers. But there were touches that spoke of the man behind the crown: a volume of poetry similar to the one he had given her, a hawk's feather preserved as a token of his family's emblem, and most surprisingly, a crude sketch of Isabella herself, clearly drawn from memory. She touched it gently. "You drew this?" "A poor likeness," he admitted, "but it helped me remember what I was fighting for during the darkest moments." Isabella turned to him, taking in the changes these weeks of war had wrought. Besides the new scar and the weight loss, there was something different in his eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there before, tempered by a deeper wisdom. "Sir Thomas told me you've been leading brilliantly," she said, "that Edavane's generals are frustrated by your tactics." A tired smile crossed his face. "We've been effective enough to stay alive, which is no small achievement against such odds." The smile faded. "But we cannot win through guerrilla tactics alone. Not with Dorneval under siege and our resources dwindling." Isabella took a deep breath. "Alaric, there's something you must know. Lady Elspeth has been captured." His face went completely still. "When? How?" "Yesterday, according to King Rowan. He said she was attempting to reach you with critical intelligence when his scouts intercepted her party." Isabella gripped his hands tightly. "She's being held in Rowan's own pavilion, heavily guarded." Alaric closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this devastating news. When he opened them again, they were filled with a cold determination that sent a shiver down Isabella's spine. "Then we must get her back," he said simply. "And quickly, before Rowan can use her against us." "He already plans to," Isabella explained. "He told me a messenger would be sent to you today, offering terms. Your surrender in exchange for both my life and Lady Elspeth's." And now you're here, denying him half his leverage. Alaric's expression was grim but thoughtful. We have a brief window of opportunity before he discovers your escape and possibly takes his anger out on my aunt. He moved to the table, studying the maps with renewed intensity. Sir Thomas, he called, and the knight who had rescued Isabella appeared at the tent entrance. Summon the War Council immediately, and send for Brother Marcus. I want our best healer to examine Mistress Morgan. As Sir Thomas departed to carry out these orders, Alaric turned back to Isabella. Forgive me, he said, his voice softening. I should have asked first. Are you injured? Did they harm you? No, she assured him. I was not mistreated beyond the confinement itself. She hesitated, then added, I had interesting conversations with both King Rowan and Princess Eleonora. Alaric's eyebrow rose. Eleonora came to see you? Yes, she was curious about me, about what you saw in me. Isabella managed a small smile. She seemed rather disappointed that I wasn't some great beauty who had enchanted you with feminine wiles. Despite the gravity of their situation, Alaric laughed, a brief, genuine sound that reminded Isabella of their time in the garden, what seemed a lifetime ago. I can imagine her confusion. She measures worth only by appearance and status. She also strikes me as intelligent and dangerously perceptive, Isabella cautioned, as does her father. They are formidable enemies, Alaric. I know. He sobered quickly. But they have made a critical error in underestimating Dorneval's resilience and in taking my aunt captive. Lady Elspeth is not merely family to me. She is the heart of our kingdom's resistance. The people love her almost more than they love their king. The arrival of a monk in simple robes interrupted their conversation. Brother Marcus, the healer, examined Isabella with brisk efficiency, pronouncing her exhausted but otherwise unharmed. He provided a tonic to help restore her strength and recommended rest, advice both he and Isabella knew was unlikely to be heeded under the circumstances. As the healer departed, officers began arriving for the War Council. Sir Roderick was among them, his face lighting with genuine pleasure when he saw Isabella. Mistress Morgan, he exclaimed, clasping her hand warmly. When we heard of your capture, I feared the worst. Your escape is nothing short of miraculous. Hardly miraculous, she replied with a smile. Just the result of brave men like Sir Thomas and his companions. The gathering grew somber as Alaric shared the news of Lady Elspeth's capture. Maps were consulted, options debated, risks weighed. Isabella, invited to remain by Alaric's insistence, watched with growing admiration as he guided the discussion. Firm but receptive to counsel. Decisive without being reckless. We cannot mount a direct assault on Rowan's camp, Sir Percival argued. They outnumber us at least 3-1, and their defenses are too strong. Agreed. Alaric nodded. But Lady Elspeth cannot remain in enemy hands. Not only is her life precious to me personally, but Rowan will use her as leverage against both our forces and the defenders of Dorneval. Sir Roderick stroked his beard thoughtfully. What we need is a diversion, something significant enough to draw attention and forces away from the king's pavilion, allowing a small team to penetrate their defenses and extract Lady Elspeth. Exactly, Alaric agreed, and I believe the perfect diversion has just presented itself. He turned to Isabella. You said Rowan plans to send a messenger today with terms for my surrender? She nodded. Yes, under flag of truce. Then we will receive this messenger with all due formality, Alaric said, a strategy clearly forming in his mind. We will appear to consider his terms seriously, perhaps even suggest a parley between myself and Rowan to negotiate the details. A parley? Sir Percival looked skeptical. Rowan would never agree to meet you personally. It's too risky for him. Not with me directly, Alaric clarified, but perhaps with a trusted representative, someone Rowan would believe carries my full authority. His eyes met Isabella's and she understood instantly. Me, she said. You want to send me back? A murmur ran through the officers. Sir Roderick looked alarmed. Your Majesty, with all respect, sending Mistress Morgan back into Rowan's camp after her escape would be the last thing he'd expect, Alaric finished, and would draw his attention completely away from Lady Elspeth. Isabella straightened her shoulders. I'll do it. Isabella, Alaric began, his tone softening. No, she interrupted. It makes perfect sense. Rowan believes I mean everything to you. My return, supposedly of my own free will, to negotiate terms that might save both you and the kingdom, would be irresistible to him. It's too dangerous, Sir Roderick protested. If he suspects a trap, he won't, Isabella insisted. Not if we make my story convincing. She turned to Alaric. We will tell him that I escaped, yes, but that once I saw the condition of your forces, I realized surrender was the only option to save lives, that I've come to convince you to accept Rowan's terms, but need to confirm what those terms would truly entail. Alaric studied her face, conflict evident in his expression. You understand what you're offering? To voluntarily return to captivity, with no guarantee we can extract both you and my aunt? I understand, she said firmly, and I trust you to succeed. The War Council continued for another hour, refining the plan. While Isabella would distract Rowan with negotiations, a small force led by Sir Thomas would infiltrate the camp to rescue Lady Elspeth. The most skilled warriors, the most experienced scouts, nothing but the best would be assigned to this critical mission. As the officers filed out to begin preparations, Alaric held Isabella back once more. When they were alone, he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if afraid she might disappear. I've only just got you back, he whispered against her hair. The thought of sending you into danger again is necessary, she finished for him. Lady Elspeth risked everything for us, Alaric. I cannot do less for her. He pulled back to look into her eyes. When did my stable mistress become such a strategist, such a warrior? Isabella smiled, touching his face gently. When I fell in love with a king who showed me that courage isn't about fearlessness, it's about facing fear and acting anyway. Alaric kissed her then, a kiss that carried all the words they didn't have time to say. His pride in her, his fear for her, his endless love that transcended the boundaries of rank and custom. When Edivane's messenger arrived that afternoon, Isabella stood at Alaric's side, her presence causing visible shock in the enemy envoy. The trap was baited, the pieces were in motion. And in the game of kings and kingdoms, a stable mistress had become an unexpected queen on the board, one prepared to risk everything for the man she loved and the land that had become her home. As the messenger departed with her offer to return to Rowan's camp as Alaric's representative, Isabella felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was still there, of course. She was no fool, no fearless hero from a minstrel's tale. But alongside it was a certainty that had been growing since the moment she first met Alaric's eyes across the great hall, that some loves were worth any risk, any sacrifice, any battle, even against the most powerful forces in the realm. King Rowan's camp buzzed with anticipation as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western hills. Word had spread quickly. The stable mistress who had escaped was returning voluntarily to negotiate on behalf of King Alaric. Soldiers gathered in small clusters, exchanging theories and wagers on what this unexpected development might mean. In the royal pavilion, Rowan paced with barely contained excitement, while Princess Eleonora watched from a cushioned chair, her expression carefully neutral. I told you he would break, Rowan said, satisfaction evident in his voice. Alaric may play at being a warrior king, but his heart betrays him. He cannot bear the thought of his precious aunt and his common lover suffering for his pride. Perhaps, Eleonora replied, studying her perfectly manicured nails. Or perhaps it's a trap. Rowan dismissed this with a wave of his hand. My scouts report she comes with only 2 escorts, under flag of truce. What trap could they possibly spring with such meager forces? It seems convenient, doesn't it? She escapes, then suddenly decides to return and negotiate? Eleonora's eyes narrowed. I spoke with her father. She is not easily broken or manipulated. Before Rowan could respond, a guard announced the arrival of Isabella and her escorts at the perimeter of the camp. The king straightened his rich doublet and assumed a position of calculated nonchalance beside a table laden with maps and documents. Bring her directly to me, he commanded. Her escorts may wait outside. Isabella entered the pavilion with her head held high, showing no sign of the fear that churned within her. She had changed from the borrowed soldier's cloak into a simple but clean dress provided from the limited supplies in Alaric's camp. Her hair was neatly braided, her posture straight and dignified. Nothing in her appearance suggested a woman returning to captivity. Rather, she carried herself with the confidence of an ambassador. "Mistress Morgan," Rowan greeted her with exaggerated courtesy. "How kind of you to rejoin us so promptly after your unauthorized departure." Isabella offered a curtsy that was perfectly proper, yet somehow conveyed no real deference. "Your Majesty, Princess Eleonora, I come on behalf of King Alaric to discuss terms." "Do you indeed?" Rowan gestured to a chair. "Please sit. Tell me, what changed between your dramatic escape and this diplomatic return? Did you perhaps discover that your king's situation is more desperate than you realized?" Isabella took the offered seat, her movements unhurried. "I discovered many things, Your Majesty, chief among them that this war has cost too many lives already." "A sentiment with which I wholeheartedly agree," Rowan replied smoothly. "Had Alaric accepted my daughter's hand as agreed, those lives might have been spared." "We both know the marriage alliance was merely a pretext," Isabella said, meeting his gaze directly. "You have wanted Dorneval for years. The treaty was simply a more economical way to acquire it than war." A flicker of surprise crossed Rowan's face before he masked it with a cold smile. "You speak quite boldly for a stable mistress." "I speak as King Alaric's representative, with his full authority in these negotiations." Rowan leaned forward, his pretense of courtesy falling away. "Let us dispense with the charade, shall we? You return because Alaric knows I hold his beloved aunt. He sent you to confirm she lives, to negotiate for her release, perhaps even to offer yourself in exchange." His eyes gleamed with triumph. "Am I wrong?" Isabella maintained her composure, though her heart raced at the mention of Lady Elspeth. "You are partially correct, Your Majesty. King Alaric is concerned for his aunt's welfare, but he has also authorized me to discuss terms for ending this conflict entirely." "The terms are simple," Rowan declared. "Alaric surrenders his crown and his kingdom. In exchange, you and Lady Elspeth keep your lives. Dorneval becomes a province of Edivane, with my daughter as its governor." From her seat, Eleonora watched the exchange with keen interest, her eyes never leaving Isabella's face. "And Alaric himself?" Isabella asked. "What becomes of him under these terms?" "He will be treated with the respect due a former king," Rowan said dismissively. "Comfortable exile, perhaps. I am not unnecessarily cruel." Isabella nodded thoughtfully. "These terms must be put in writing, of course, and I must be permitted to see Lady Elspeth, to confirm her well-being before bringing any agreement back to King Alaric." Naturally, Rowan's satisfaction was palpable. He believed he had won. "You shall see her presently. First, however, I am curious. What convinced you to undertake this mission? Surely returning to my camp carried significant personal risk." "As you noted yourself, Your Majesty, King Alaric cares deeply for both his aunt and for me. I could not bear to see him torn between his duty to his kingdom and his love for his family." Isabella's voice softened convincingly. "Sometimes, surrender is the most courageous choice." Eleonora rose suddenly from her chair, approaching Isabella with measured steps. "You love him that much? Enough to deliver his kingdom to his enemies?" Isabella met the princess's searching gaze. "I love him enough to want his suffering to end. This war cannot be won, only prolonged at the cost of more lives." Something unreadable flickered in Eleonora's eyes. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a worthy adversary. "Father, I will take Mistress Morgan to see Lady Elspeth while you prepare the formal terms." Rowan looked surprised at his daughter's offer, but nodded his assent. "An excellent suggestion. Return within the hour. I'll have the documents ready for her to take back to Alaric." Eleonora led Isabella from the pavilion, followed at a discreet distance by 2 guards. As they walked through the camp, the princess spoke in a low voice that wouldn't carry to their escort. "You're planning something, aren't you? This sudden surrender is too convenient." Isabella kept her expression neutral. "I'm simply following my king's instructions, Your Highness." "Of course you are." Eleonora's tone made it clear she didn't believe this for a moment. "Tell me, when did a stable mistress learn to negotiate like a diplomat? To carry herself like a queen?" Perhaps when a king saw me as more than my station, Isabella replied quietly. They had reached a smaller tent, heavily guarded, set close to Rowan's own pavilion. Eleanora dismissed the guards at the entrance with the imperious wave, though the two who had followed them remained at a distance. 5 minutes, the princess said. No more. Inside, Lady Elspeth sat on a camp stool, her silver hair uncharacteristically disheveled, her normally immaculate appearance showing signs of rough treatment. But her eyes, when they landed on Isabella, were as sharp and alert as ever. Isabella! The Countess rose quickly, embracing her with surprising strength. Thank God you're safe. We heard of your escape but feared you might have been recaptured in the forest. I reached Alaric safely, Isabella confirmed, keeping her voice low. And now I've returned as part of a plan to free you. Lady Elspeth pulled back, studying Isabella's face intently. Alaric agreed to this, to send you back into danger? Reluctantly, yes. Isabella glanced toward the tent entrance to ensure they weren't being overheard. Listen carefully. Shortly after nightfall, there will be a distraction at the eastern edge of the camp. When it happens, be ready. Sir Thomas and a small force will come for you. The Countess's eyes widened slightly, but she controlled her reaction with the discipline of a lifelong courtier. And you? Will you leave with us? That's the plan, Isabella assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at her. The rescue mission was fraught with risk, and success was far from guaranteed. Lady Elspeth gripped Isabella's hands tightly. Whatever happens, you must know how proud I am of you. When Alaric first spoke of his feelings for a stable mistress, I confess I had my doubts. Now I see he recognized what many of us missed, a woman of extraordinary courage and character. Tears pricked at Isabella's eyes, but she blinked them away. Save your praise for when we're safely back with Alaric. The tent flap opened, and Eleanora reappeared. Time's up. As Isabella turned to leave, Lady Elspeth called after her. Tell my nephew I expect to dance at your wedding, my dear. Nothing less will do. The bold statement brought a flush to Isabella's cheeks and a look of startled surprise to Eleanora's face. The princess said nothing, however, as she escorted Isabella back toward her father's pavilion. Halfway there, Eleanora suddenly diverted their path, leading them behind a supply tent where they could not be easily observed. I know you're planning a rescue, she said without preamble. Don't bother denying it. Isabella's heart stuttered, but she kept her expression neutral. Your Highness, stop. Eleanora held up a hand. I'm not going to expose you. Not yet, at least. Her eyes searched Isabella's face. I want to understand something first. You could have remained safely with Alaric after your escape. Instead, you've returned to almost certain danger. Why? The directness of the question caught Isabella off guard. After a moment's consideration, she decided that honesty might serve better than deception with this perceptive princess. Because I love him, she said simply, and because Lady Elspeth is dear to him. Love, Eleanora repeated as if tasting an unfamiliar food. My father would say love is a weakness in a ruler, a liability. Your father is wrong, Isabella replied, her voice quiet but firm. Love doesn't weaken Alaric. It strengthens him, gives him something beyond duty and obligation to fight for. Eleanora studied her for a long moment. You truly believe you could be a queen, don't you? A common woman, with earth beneath her fingernails and no noble blood in her veins. I believe I could stand beside Alaric and help him be the best king possible, Isabella corrected. The title matters far less than the purpose it serves. Something shifted in Eleanora's expression, not softening, exactly, but a subtle change in assessment. You may go, she said abruptly. My father awaits, with his terms. Back in the royal pavilion, Rowan presented Isabella with a document detailing the surrender terms. They were harsh but not surprising. Dornoval would retain its name but become effectively a province of Edivane. Alaric would abdicate and accept exile. Those who had fought most prominently against Rowan's forces would face punishment, though most common soldiers would be pardoned. You understand, of course, that Alaric must come himself to sign this agreement, Rowan said as Isabella reviewed the document. I will accept nothing less than his personal surrender. Of course, Your Majesty. Isabella carefully rolled the parchment. With your permission, I will return to him immediately with these terms. Not tonight, Rowan countered, a slight smile playing at his lips. It grows late, and the forest is dangerous after dark. You will be my guest until morning. Isabella felt a chill at these words. Was he suspicious, or merely being cautious? As you wish, Your Majesty. However, King Alaric will be anxious for my return. Let him be anxious, Rowan replied dismissively. One night will make little difference to the outcome. But it would make all the difference to their rescue plan. Isabella struggled to maintain her composure as she realized the implications. If she couldn't leave, how would she signal Alaric's forces that the mission should proceed? As if reading her thoughts, Eleonora spoke up. Father, perhaps we should allow Mistress Morgan to depart as planned. After all, the sooner she delivers your terms, the sooner this conflict may end. Rowan looked at his daughter with surprise. Your concern for a speedy resolution is commendable, Eleonora, but I prefer caution. Mistress Morgan will remain tonight, in the same tent she so recently vacated. With that, the audience was clearly at an end. Guards escorted Isabella back to her former prison, now with twice the number of sentries posted outside. As the tent flap closed behind her, she sank onto the cot, mind racing. The rescue would proceed regardless. Alaric and Sir Thomas had been clear that the mission would continue even if Isabella couldn't return with confirmation. But without her to help coordinate from inside, the dangers multiplied significantly. As darkness fell, Isabella paced the confines of her tent, straining to hear any unusual sounds from the camp. Hours passed with nothing but the normal noises of an army at rest. Guards calling to one another, the occasional burst of laughter from soldiers around cook fires, the distant nickering of horses. Had the plan been abandoned? Or worse, discovered? Just as despair began to take hold, a tremendous explosion shattered the night's quiet. Then another, and another. Fire bloomed at the eastern edge of the camp, exactly as planned. Shouts of alarm rose from all directions as soldiers scrambled to respond to the attack. Isabella moved to the back of her tent, feeling along the canvas for the spot where Sir Thomas had cut through during her previous escape. To her dismay, she found the material had been reinforced with leather patches. No knife could easily penetrate it now. The sounds of chaos outside intensified. This was the distraction meant to cover Lady Elspeth's rescue, but Isabella remained trapped, unable to take advantage of the confusion. She pushed against the tent wall in frustration, searching for any weakness in its construction. Suddenly, the front entrance flew open. Isabella whirled, expecting to see Edivane guards come to secure her during the commotion. Instead, Princess Eleonora stood there, a dark cloak wrapped around her elegant gown, a dagger gleaming in her hand. "Quickly," the princess hissed. "If you're going to leave, it must be now." Isabella stared in disbelief. "You're helping me escape?" "I'm ensuring this war ends with minimal bloodshed," Eleonora replied tersely. "My father's obsession with conquering Dorneval has cost too many lives already." "But why?" "There's no time." Eleonora thrust a cloak into Isabella's hands. "Put this on. Keep your head down. The eastern section of camp is in chaos. Your king's men know their business, it seems." Still stunned by this unexpected ally, Isabella quickly donned the cloak. "Lady Elspeth is already being extracted, if my observations are correct." Eleonora's expression was unreadable in the dim light. "Now follow me, and for God's sake be silent." They slipped from the tent, Eleonora confidently leading the way through the confusion of the camp. Soldiers rushed past them, focused entirely on the fires spreading through the eastern section. No one paid attention to two cloaked women moving in the opposite direction. At the western edge of the camp, Eleonora stopped in the shadow of a supply wagon. "There," she whispered, pointing to where the tree line began some 50 yards away. "Your escort waits among those pines. Can you make it from here?" Isabella nodded, then hesitated. "Why are you doing this?" Eleonora's mouth curved in a small, enigmatic smile. "Let's call it respect for a worthy opponent. Or perhaps—" She paused, something almost wistful flickering across her face. "Perhaps I simply wish to believe that love like yours and Alaric's is possible, even if it was never possible for me." Before Isabella could respond, The princess melted back into the shadows of the camp. Drawing her cloak tighter, Isabella sprinted for the tree line, her heart pounding with each step. When she reached the shelter of the pines, strong hands pulled her into the protective darkness. "Mistress Morgan." Sir Thomas's familiar voice was thick with relief. "Thank God. We feared you might be too closely guarded to reach." "Lady Elspeth?" Isabella gasped, still breathless from her sprint.
"Safely away," he assured her, "already on the path back to our camp with half our force as escort." "Then let's not linger," Isabella urged, casting one last glance at Edavane's camp, where the fires were beginning to be brought under control. "King Rowan will not be pleased when he discovers both his hostages gone." They traveled through the night, moving swiftly along hidden paths that Sir Thomas and his men had scouted thoroughly in preparation for the mission. By dawn, they had reached Alaric's hidden valley, where Lady Elspeth had arrived an hour earlier. The reunion was emotional and joyous. Alaric embraced Isabella with such intensity that he lifted her off her feet, his relief palpable in every line of his body. When he finally set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Never again," he said hoarsely. "Never again will I send you into danger." Isabella smiled up at him, touching his face gently. "I went willingly, if you recall." "Which only proves your courage exceeds your common sense," Lady Elspeth interjected, though her tone was warm with affection. "A quality you and my nephew share, it seems." The three of them, along with Alaric's senior officers, gathered in the command tent to debrief. Isabella recounted everything: Rowan's terms, her conversation with Lady Elspeth, and most surprisingly, Princess Eleonora's unexpected assistance. "She helped you escape?" Alaric asked incredulously. "The same princess who was publicly humiliated by my rejection?" "I believe she has grown disillusioned with her father's methods," Isabella explained. "And perhaps she saw something in our relationship that moved her." Lady Elspeth's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Or perhaps she recognized a fellow woman of strength and made a choice to support you over her father's ambitions." "Whatever her reasons," Sir Roderick said practically, "her actions have given us an advantage. Rowan has lost both his hostages and his leverage. What will he do now?" "He will be furious," Alaric said grimly, "and a furious Rowan is dangerous, but also prone to mistakes." He studied the maps before him, his strategic mind already turning to new possibilities. "With Lady Elspeth safe, we can now coordinate more effectively with Dorneval's defenders, and without hostages to protect, we can take more aggressive action against Edavane's forces." The council continued through the morning, plans forming and solidifying. By midday, messengers had been dispatched to Dorneval with coded instructions, and scouts reported that Edavane's camp was in disarray following the night's events. As the officers dispersed to carry out their assigned tasks, Alaric drew Isabella aside, leading her to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. The sun had broken through the morning mist, bathing the encampment in golden light that belied the grim reality of their situation. "There's something I need to ask you," he said, his expression suddenly serious. "Something I've wanted to ask since you first returned to me." Isabella's heart quickened at his tone. "What is it?" To her astonishment, Alaric lowered himself to one knee before her, taking her hands in his. "Isabella Morgan, when this war is over, when Dorneval is safe and our future secure, will you stand beside me not just as the woman I love, but as my queen?" Tears sprang to her eyes, unbidden and unstoppable. "Alaric, the nobles will never accept." "I'm not asking what the nobles will accept," he interrupted gently. "I'm asking what you will accept. The rest can be managed." Isabella looked down at their joined hands, his bearing the calluses of a warrior king, hers marked by years of honest labor. Different paths, different lives, brought together by a love that had already changed the course of a kingdom. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly. "Yes, whatever comes, whatever challenges we face, I will stand beside you." Alaric rose and drew her into his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke of futures yet to be written, battles yet to be fought, and a love that had proven stronger than tradition, stronger than war, stronger than the machinations of their enemies. The war for Dorneval was far from over. Difficult days lay ahead, with no guarantee of victory. But in that moment, on a sunlit hillside above a hidden valley, a king and a stable mistress forged a bond that would become legend, a love that began in secret garden meetings and would end, one day, with a crown placed upon the head of a woman who had proven herself worthy not by blood or birth, but by courage, wisdom, and an unyielding heart.